I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. First thing is there any changes or questions on anything on the agenda? If not, I'll make a motion to approve the agenda. I got a second by Rick Seiler. There's no other comments. All in favor of approving the agenda, say aye. Aye. Any opposition? Okay, the agenda is approved. First thing on the agenda, Ken, are you going to take this?
I will.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, so the first item on the agenda tonight is a request for a registered land survey. This one particularly is number 28, and the applicant is Marvin Sticha. Mr. Sticha owns two properties on East Main Street, address 218 East Main Street with the apartment building, and then there's a single-family home on the other lot. He is selling the single-family home that is located right on Main Street, just east of the apartment building. It kind of sits back from Main Street a little bit. And the single-family home for the purchase, wanted to have a detached garage be part of that property, which is currently part of the property of the apartment building at this point. And I'll show you how that lays out on the overhead here in a minute. But that's where the modification was requested to be done. Initially, we looked at just a minor subdivision, which is a lot line adjustment that would not normally come in front of the council. But Stewart County noted that the property was Torrens property, and therefore can, at that point, request or require that registered land survey be filed to adjust that lot line because property had been registered previously. So that is why we had to go the registered land survey review route with this particular lot line adjustment. Last time we reviewed an RLS was back in 2014. That was for the wine bar property when the city sold that to the wine bar at that time. Have problems with the slideshow here. There we go. So on the airport, you can kind of see the two properties here. One currently is kind of an L shape. This is the apartment building, and then a detached garage, and the other single-family home property. So in the sale, they wanted to adjust the lot line to sell the single-family home with the detached garage. So basically, redraw that line right down the middle of the property here. So that's really what they're going for with the RLS. So it's pretty straightforward. B1 Central Business Zoning District, single-family homes of legal non-conforming use can continue to operate as a single-family home as long as it does not sit vacant for a 1-year time period or more. There's no minimum lot size in the B1 district, and obviously therefore no minimum lot size that they need to meet with the adjustment. Planning Commission did hold a public hearing on July 24th. We had two neighboring building owners in attendance. They did not have any comment to make for the public hearing, and ultimately the Planning Commission did recommend approval on a 3-0 vote. And the Planning Commission and staff do recommend the council tonight to move forward with the approval of the resolution approving registered land survey number 28. And the drawing on the overhead is the actual drawing of that registered land survey for your review tonight. So basically, as I pointed out before, just redrawing a lot line right down the middle of the registered land. So the single family home will have the detached garage, the apartment building will remain on its own separate parcel. Just kind of zoomed in.
Is the entryway coming in that property, is that one of those that are going to be closed?
The
When we
access
do the
point,
2020 project?
no, I do not believe this is going to be closed. It'll remain, and they're actually having a formal easement document being prepared that notes that that's shared between those two properties, because they would not likely get another one on there. So that'll be the access that we shared, and that'll be memorialized with their easement document.
Is there alley access behind them?
There is alley access as well.
And with the filing, Will Scott or Lucero County be notified? I'm assuming there's probably some tax differences because the property size is changing.
Oh, of course,
Property tax
yes.
is- okay.
Mhm.
Is Mr. Sticha the original, when that house burned down?
He was, yes, he's still
He was
the
the
same owner from
So
that.
he came to council that time. Is there any way that we can get him? He told us at council, we wanted to kind of dress that up because it isn't the nicest looking piece of property.
Mhm.
And the building itself is odd. You got the beautiful church across the street. You're just coming into a historic downtown. And then you have this there. And he had said at that time, I'd asked him that he was thinking, or that he would put, if I remember right, we probably have to look at the minutes or go back.
Some
But
decent shrubs.
he was gonna do some type of landscaping to help screen that off, and he never did. And that was, what, 8 years ago, maybe? I think I was just on the council.
Yeah, probably didn't be that far.
So, is there a way that we can, in improving this, get him to make those upgrades, or make him pave the parking lot, or anything? I mean, it's in the business district, isn't there an ordinance that says that has to be paved? The driveway and the bottom area for parking for the.
If there's any
For
new
that
parking
apartment building.
spaces, they would have to be paved. Tenant's not proposing to change any of the layout or anything at this point.
Okay.
So, my answer would be no. As far as landscaping, I don't know, Scott, if you legal thought on that.
Typically, no, not in this type of approval.
Well, it's kind of disappointing. What about in the previous approval, though, when he told us he was gonna do it?
You know, that was,
And he didn't.
At the time, that was out of our zoning ordinance, just for everybody's background, that the B1 district required any historic building at the time of demolition be reviewed for compliance with the city council before a demolition permit would be issued. I don't believe, I'd have to look back at that language, provides for any conditions for approval. I think it was something he offered up. Obviously didn't follow through, but I'd have to look at the minutes.
He offered it up once the council asked him to.
Yeah, I'd have to look at the minutes, John. I'm not
Okay.
sure how that all played.
I don't know if we can go back and say, hey, you did this before, so. I mean, is there anything say that we have to do this for him?
I would say based on the merits of what is applied for here, I don't see the direct connection to that, I guess from a legal standpoint.
No, I would agree as well. I mean, what you have pending before you, be difficult to do. Certainly can ask, and you can have staff try to do something with that regard, but as to the approval that's pending, no.
I certainly will bring it up with them, Sean, because I do remember that.
I noticed in the picture that some of the building is outside the lot line.
Which?
The garage.
Large?
No,
There's the first picture.
the first picture.
Oh,
is
the
just-
photo, sorry.
It's just how it overlays on the pictures. Those aren't exact.
Oh,
The previous, that's.
You looking at the photos?
The aerial,
Yeah.
the aerial photo.
Oh, the aerial photo.
The aerial photo with,
And then
you know,
stand in
the lot line imposed on it. but-
Oh,
Oh, these are the lot lines that will be going away.
You know, you notice on
Right
the
here.
west end.
West side.
He also.
Oh, that, no, so these air photos from the Sewer County are not accurate as far as that is representation, so if we go to this one
So
here, it
there
actually
is
does
no-
not overlap the property.
Okay, it's not like the issue we had with the 2B building.
No.
Where we had 6 inches.
He also owns another lot adjacent to the western boundary of what you see in front of you. It doesn't show up on there, but there's another small sliver, Ken, that runs.
Yep. Yeah, so basically this building's within a foot of the property line, so it's not overlapping.
Okay.
And then the other piece that Mike's referring to is a little sliver right through here that's not part of the registered land. But no encroachment.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, if not, I guess I'll look for a motion to approve the land survey number 28.
So moved.
Motion by Maggie Bass,
Second.
second by Bruce Wolf. If there's no other comments or questions, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Okay, passes 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda, Chris, are you going to take?
I'm going to start it, and that's going to be a little tag team here. So, thank you, Mayor, members of the City Council. The item before you here is the, what we're referring to as the ADA transition plan. And actually, we had done really the bulk of this work, and this work was really completed last year. The data collection was completed last year. The report was essentially completed last December, and we had intended to bring it to you then, and then started realizing it might be better to wait until actually people can see the things that we're talking about, so we've been under snowbanks and things like that. So what I want to do is introduce to you Mike Horn with SCH. Mike Horn is actually the project manager for this project. It was kind of a team effort, but Mike is a professional landscape architect and a specialist in ADA and has worked on other transition plans. So I'm going to let him walk through kind of the report, and there's some things that I'm going to share with you as well. So.
Okay. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. Mayor, council members, thank you for having me here. As Chris said, I'm a registered landscape architect. I have been in the ADA world for quite a while. I was an ADA coordinator for both Three Rivers Park District up in the metro area, in addition to Fish, Wildlife Parks out in Montana for 8 years. So it's been kind of in my wheelhouse for over 20 years, doing ADA improvements and park development projects. I want to talk a little bit about the background of ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. There's really 3 different sections of that. There's Title I, Title II, and Title III. Title I is regulations for the federal government. That's what they go by. Title II is all state and local governments, including the city of New Prague. And then Title III is all your private businesses, what they're required to do. So again, Title II is what the city of New Prague is what we're developing the plan for. And Title II has kind of 2 different categories. If you have less than 50 full-time equivalents, you can just do a self-evaluation. And you'll hear these words, self-evaluation and plan, a lot. And the self-evaluation is what Chris mentioned that we picked up last year. We did all the data collection. It's knowing what you have in the field. And then the plan is kind of the written document that kind of guides the public what is required for ADA. And if you're under 50 full-time equivalents, you're just required to do kind of the self-evaluation, knowing what you have in the field and where your barriers are at. If you have over 50, you have to include the plan. And Chris is going to kind of go over the requirements of what's included in that plan. And the plan includes the self-evaluation again. We use kind of the federal standards for the actual plan as an outline, and again, Chris will go over that. But for what we picked up in the field, the federal requirements are very, very vague as far as what happens in the public right-of-way. They let the U.S. Department of Transportation kind of take that realm. We follow the Minnesota's Department of Transportation and their criteria in what we picked up, because that's what's going to kind of dictate the improvements within the public right-of-way. So Chris is going to step back up and talk about those federal requirements, the policies, practices, and the implementation schedule, budget, a couple other things.
Okay. Actually, I want to maybe just quick refer you to, if you've got the document in front of you there, if you refer to page 3, the header is policy and practices. And again, as Mike mentioned, a lot of these items are basically covered under the federal requirements of what the city is required to do as part of the ADA transition plan. I should step back and just kind of note that the timing on this was actually really interesting, doing the report when we did, because if you look at the project we're doing this summer, we are addressing a lot of ADA. You'll see if you look, later on the maps, or a lot of the areas that we covered under this project are things that we're looking at and addressing in this year's project as well. So for us, it was actually a working document. It was actually, before we finalized, we kind of got to see how is it going to work for us in the future when we go to do other projects, et cetera. And in fact, with that, we ended up carrying it kind of a step further, and we'll talk about that when we talk about minor improvement and major improvements, which is something that isn't required by the plan, but something that we found it was easier for us to apply this to kind of everyday use. So when we talk about the policies and practices as it's outlined here, these items are again required by the plan to define an ADA coordinator. We've defined it as the Public Works Director, for succession planning, obviously it'd be at the same position going forward. The other is the public outreach. We're suggesting that this be published for basically to seek public comment, suggesting probably a 30-day comment period in case the public wants to address the plan, and the plan is outlined where we can receive those comments and include them in the report. Kind of noting, kind of again, how we've done things in the past. The city has been through a pretty regimented street reconstruction program, starting really in 2001. The last significant reconstruction was in 14 or 15 was not a major reconstruction, but was definitely a major improvement, and then the project again this year. The one thing I want to point out, you'll kind of see this if it hasn't spiked your curiosity a little bit. ADA standards were, even the details and the information that was provided by MnDOT, kind of state standards, up until about 2012 were very simple. 2012, 2013, it was kind of an evolving process in terms of the standards, how to build ped ramps, the things to think about, training for contractors, training for engineers, and it's really changed a lot just in the last few years. So there's things that we did up in even until 12 and 13 that we would have done different if we done it today. So the whole industry has learned a lot within the last 5 years. So again, it's been our practice again to address all those ADA needs, bringing pedestrian ramps up to standards, et cetera, when we're doing projects. Again, so the intent is to conclude this with our improvement schedules going forward. Part of the plan process, again, is to do what they call a grievance procedure. If you'll see in the document, there is a document there that talks about how somebody can bring it to our attention if they have a grievance or a question about how the city is addressing ADA needs, access needs within the cities, either public right-of-way or public facilities, and again, the procedure on how those will be addressed. We talked about schedule. And as it's noted in the report, there'll be a lot of improvements related to ADA. We're actually being addressed this year when we talk about County Road 37, as well as some of the other local streets that had ramps, ped ramps, et cetera, that didn't meet current standards. Those were being addressed under this project. Next year, there'll be a significant amount that'll be addressed by MnDOT on their corridor on 19 as well. And then some of the future improvements, again, those will be, additional work will be addressed in those projects in the future. The one thing that's kind of been challenging, and that's what we talk about when we talk about major and minor improvements, and the spreadsheets kind of show highlighted areas. We tried to do, this wasn't required as part of the document. In terms of ADA, pedestrian facilities, they're compliant or non-compliant. That's it. There's a bunch of data points that had to be collected, and if it doesn't meet all the data points, it's non-compliant. But for us, it didn't help us a lot until we could tell a lot more about how non-compliant was it. So we went in and did some filtering, and that's why you'll see in some of the spreadsheets of major and minor barriers, where we try to highlight areas that were a little bit out of we'll call it a tolerance. And really, there is no industry standard on tolerance. But when we started looking at the project this year and trying to understand at what point are we going to replace something that seems perfectly fine, and as an example, MnDOT has addressed like a new sidewalk that goes in will have required to have a cross slope of about 1.5%. But if it's an existing sidewalk, it's in good condition, it's behind the curb, it's very difficult to replace or bring into standard without reconstructing the road, they have a tolerance of about 3% if it's existing. If it's under 3%, it can stay in place. If it's over that, we need to replace it, which is what happened up on County Road D. There was a number of sections of sidewalk that were replaced because the cross slope on those sidewalks exceeded that 3%. So then, again, with all the other data points that existed, we tried to use some type of a judgment criteria on looking at what all is entailed in terms of doing replacing it. So we do note in the implementation schedule that, I'm going to read this directly. All major and minor barriers will be reviewed on a case-by-case basis when adjacent roadway improvements are scheduled. The appropriateness of ADA improvements based on the proposed roadway improvement will be reviewed and considered at the discretion of the city engineer and the public works director. And again, trying to decide, is a certain improvement maybe too invasive for the type of roadway improvement that happens at that time? Meaning, is it mill and overlay, pavement replacement versus a more, like a reconstruction project? Again, a reconstruction project is the time to address the more, address those items in entirety. And then we talk about budget. This is really to put this kind of in perspective. It isn't necessarily the intent or the plan that we're going to address all these necessarily in 20 years. We're going to see what's practical and maybe what's reasonable in terms of budgeting. But looking at pedestrian ramps with major barriers, so significant, maybe have more than a couple data points that are out of standard. Putting some reasonable conservative estimate on what the cost would be. We estimated just under $500,000, $477,000 to just improve pedestrian facilities, pedestrian ramps that had major barriers. And if those were done over about a 20-year period, we're looking at something just under $24,000 in 2019 dollars. Of course, those will be more efficient when they're done with projects, et cetera, like that. But we're trying to just kind of put it in perspective. The same thing when it comes to sidewalk barriers. These are areas where maybe sidewalks are heaves or settles or cross slopes are too much. Estimating that at just over $1.4 million and spread over 20 years, $71,000. Again, these are things that just, again, it at least puts it in the forefront, so that we're aware of it and that we can plan for it when we do projects in the future. So again, kind of the point I wanted to make is for us this year it has actually been a working document, so we kind of got to see how it will work for us in the future, work for Public Works, etc. So I'm going to turn it back to Mike to talk about what we call the self-evaluation process. Again, we'll slip through some of these maps to kind of explain kind of what was done and what it all means.
So Chris, just one quick question. So anything on, which is now 10th Street and 7th Street, going, all those will be corrected? Is that my understanding?
Those all have been corrected.
Okay.
Yes. Or are being finished.
Right, yeah, during the, when the project's done, that whole stretch, those should all be green.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're going to step back a little bit, and Chris, you were right, we should have switched these order. We're going to step back a little bit and talk about the different parts of our self-evaluation, what we went out and collected data on last summer. And there's pedestrian ramps, I'm going to come back to that because that's the most complicated. There's pedestrian crossings, that's the pedestrian crossing the road, so it's mainly your cross slope on your road. Sidewalks and trails, again, relatively simple, that's your running slope or cross slope that we're looking for on that. And then parking lots, again, cross slope or running slope on your parking lots, making sure that they're under 2%. And back to pedestrian ramps, there's a lot, you'll see a lot of data points on your sheet because you're looking at the curb and gutter, hin slope, out slope, cross slope, so there could be up to 3 data points for just the curb and gutter, whether or not it has truncated domes or not, what the slope of that is. if that's part of the landing or not. It kind of goes on, but it gets really complicated when you're talking the pedestrian part of this facility when you get to a street intersection. And I want to read right from page 1 of the executive summary under pedestrian ramps and move on down there. Again, the pedestrian ramp is a transition between the street and the PAR, and the PAR is your pedestrian access route. That's what MnDOT classifies as the PAR. Out of 428 total pedestrian ramps, 10% meet current accessibility standards, while 90 have a component that creates a barrier. Again, that's a pretty cut and dry. It's either compliant or not compliant. And again, Chris talked about kind of dividing that non-compliant on what's really could be considered a non-barrier, but it doesn't meet all the criteria. And if we could go to the next slide. All right, thank you. So Chris has highlighted a few of the intersections that we can kind of talk about with the photos. And Chris, you want to?
Yeah, just to explain, these are actually the, get my laser done. So these are the ones right outside City Hall here on the corner. And these are the next block up on Second Street. And then we got photos actually down by Columbus and by the hospital, in case curious of those locations. So we'll get some photos and help explain some of those as well. Go to the photos?
Yeah, please.
Forward here.
So here is one that is considered non-compliant. It doesn't have a landing area. Again, a landing area is where the pedestrian comes to the intersection, and it's a resting or staging area before they cross the street. So you need a landing area which is relatively flat, 1.5% or less in any direction, and this ramp does not have that. It appears that from the curb, it would be hard to negotiate that turn once you go kind of up the ramp and turn and go either direction. And yeah, there's some other issues with this as well, but that's the main barrier.
At one point in time, was these incompliant?
With the standards that were at that time, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, as an example, I mean, back prior to 2012, MnDOT had like one plane. It was a simple explanation, and you'll notice it on new sidewalks. The old theory was the sidewalk followed the curb, so you could see that it matched the street real well. Now you'll see a lot of the new sidewalks. You'll see a lot more grade difference when you come into ramps and you rise up. You got a flat area. You'll see a lot more change in elevation and stuff with the new facilities.
Chris mentioned a few years ago the Minnesota Department of Transportation plate was 1 page. Now it's 12. So they've given a lot more direction on how to build these successfully.
So there's a lot of research, a lot of people involved that were in finding out what works and what doesn't work. So there's a lot more standards, like I said, and even the contractors, it was hard for them for a while to understand what to do, and a lot of them, they basically been trained, and they're getting it down real well.
Another example of truncated domes not extending the full width of the ramp. Here it looks like a manhole. Today's standards, you're not allowed to put any utilities or manhole cover plates in the ramp itself. And it looks like it says there's a vertical discontinuity on the back side, which is a lip in the concrete where you've had frost heaving. There's probably a manhole structure underneath there that doesn't move, and the sidewalk obviously does. And so that's created a lip there, or a barrier that could be fixed relatively easily.
Is that a city sidewalk, or does that belong to the church?
No, that's city public right away. Well, it's technically on Columbus and Second, so it's county road and city road. But that was actually built in 2012 with the Second Street
That whole
project.
road is doing that, or that whole sidewalk is doing that, where they're shifting
On Second or on Columbus?
right there. If you were to head south on that,
That's Columbus.
Okay.
so that whole sidewalk is in really rough shape, and I'm not quite sure why.
Again, on Columbus, the north-south leg, or on
Yeah,
second, the
would be
east-west
right
leg?
there in Columbus. on the
Okay,
north
yeah.
side.
Well, there's a good chance that'll probably get upgraded in the next couple of years, so a lot of that'll get addressed at that time. Just to explain too, so what Mike was talking about is, so the landing that we talk about is just uphill from the ramps, or like the truncated domes. So those are now, the standard is to pour those separately and actually put steel bars coming out, so that when the sidewalks on either side are poured, you don't get those movements. So it's things like that that the trade has learned how to do.
This was the old style of a pedestrian ramp, and it's probably pretty negotiable for most people. The exposed aggregate was used before there was truncated domes, so that does give some indication for the disabled public that is coming up to a street crossing. It might meet grades, but again, with today's standards, it lacks truncated domes.
Very similar.
Very similar to this one. No truncated domes, they use exposed aggregate.
Yeah, I'd say the landing is probably fine. Probably good landing. The slope's probably fine, but just the standard doesn't meet today. This one's compliant. This is compliant, yeah. So this is one that's compliant. Again, it's got the landing area, the slopes, everything is fine. This is at the up at Second and Central, so a block north of here.
It looks like that is lacking a landing, is that?
Yeah, generally a landing and then orientation towards the west as well. It would be under
No, there's got over there,
Yeah.
no truncated domes.
And again, this is just, we filtered things, this was something we did for this report. It wasn't part of, again, a requirement of the report where we filtered things to major and minor. And frankly, if we had more time, we probably would have filtered more things probably towards the minor side that ended up on the major, because it really was no standard for us to develop it. But, we were looking at, multiple data points, and if there was a few like a couple out of standard, that kicked them into the major. But you'll see on some of these, there's just isn't a lot, there's not a lot of barrier there, but at some point when that area is reconstructed, they do definitely need to be brought up to current standards. So again, you search here, it's just like the cross slope coming in. Another one that's compliant. This is just on the north side of the street here, right in front of City Hall. So there's the City Hall parking lot. Again, this is compliant. It's got the landing area is fine. And then the other three corners actually technically are not non-compliant for some reason or another.
So here, it's the landing cross slope is 0.3% over what's allowed. So it's really close, but it falls within as a barrier for
And then the other is this vertical discontinuity. There's a little bit of a gap that's opened up. Again, under today's standards, the new standard plates is actually rods are put in here to keep those things from moving and pulling apart. To keep, make that landing a lot easier, or that ramp a lot easier to maneuver. Same thing, the other sides, very similar things. It's mostly landing slopes.
cross slope of the ramp there.
Yeah.
Probably was.
Yeah. And then the same thing on the other side. So those were just examples we wanted to just share with you of what all's kind of involved and what's considered non-compliant, but to what level is that a barrier versus, we have areas that obviously don't even have pit ramps or don't have truncated domes. They're way out of whack. Those definitely are areas that probably need to be focused on specifically and addressed even as separate projects.
You want to go over any of your detail?
Unless you want to comment on it, the details.
Some of the details of the map, the red, again, the red are representing the non-compliant major barriers. The yellow would be the non-compliant minor barriers, whereas the green would be compliant. And that's true with all of the maps for crossings, head ramps, trails, as well as parking lots.
This is figure 2 of the report.
Yeah. Sidewalk barriers, a lot of it has to do with cross slopes or just displaced panels, things like that.
Frost heating
Yeah.
in the trees, the frost heating in the trees, yeah.
So obviously, areas that are flagged when we do projects, we can evaluate it, or again, evaluating the data to see if there are areas that should be addressed sooner than later, even in specific projects. And then last is kind of the parking facilities.
So Chris, if you go back to figure 3, just as the mayor was asking about County Route 37, what are you doing with the sidewalks to address the barriers on 37 this year?
Well, so the ones you see up here are mostly, the long lines were mostly cross slope. So they're greater than 3% cross slope, which was kind of the MnDOT industry standard on replacing existing good walk, but that's just, has too much cross slope. And the main reason being is somebody that's in a wheelchair will tend to be forced over by the grade. The other are corners are ped ramps, so those are, again, those kind of duplicates show up on the first one, and those will be addressed as well, or have been addressed.
Chris, when you talk about cross slope, you're going from the back edge of the curb, or excuse me, the back edge of the sidewalk by the property owner towards the curb, as far as what that slope is, correct?
Yeah. Correct. So if you're walking longitudinally down the sidewalk, it's the slope, yeah, from the property line towards the curb, the cross slope.
What about the slope down?
Well, there's not a lot you can do, there's not a lot you can do on that, because pretty much the sidewalk has to follow the street. So there's obviously preferred grade on the sidewalk, but if the street's already there, there's not a lot you can do.
Yeah, it's very typical for like river towns that are on a hillside. The sidewalks follow the contour of the street. There's not much you can do.
I spent a lot of time on this, and even the ones that say there was barriers, I couldn't tell the difference, not in this thing. I'm sure if I was in a manual. My concern is always for the elderly, and still, even the ones that have major barriers on them, you can get by this crossroad.
Yeah, I think, like I said, if frankly, it was kind of outside, even outside our scope and our budget. It was just something I needed to do as more of a tool, is breaking that out into major and minor. And frankly, if there's more time spent, I probably would shift a few more of those from the major to what we call minor, because after looking at them, physically looking at them, we would address it during a reconstruction for sure, but would it make sense to address it during a mill and overlay? In a lot of cases, probably not. You look at the ramps out here in front of City Hall, probably not something, they'll get worn over time, and maybe things will change with frost heaving and things like that, but as they are today, if we were doing a mill and overlay, I don't know if I could justify saying we should rip that up and replace that until some point when there actually was reconstructed, or it became to the point where it deteriorated and maybe needed to be addressed. So that's why we did, we put that clause in the report that basically would be reviewed on a case-by-case basis and at the discretion of the city engineer and the public works director. So there'd be some judgment put on what seemed reasonable at the time.
I had a question. What is APS?
Automated pedestrian signal, so that's the push buttons that you find at an intersection where you go up and hit the button to cross.
Okay. The grievance procedure refers to alleged violations for all the non-compliant areas violations.
Might be a legal question. I wouldn't consider them a violation unless somebody actually makes a complaint about it.
Well, the grievance procedure talks about making a complaint alleging a violation, so I just want to make sure I understand, we have this many potential violations or violations in place.
The answer is yes, you do have potential violations in place. I mean, it doesn't mean it is. It can be shown if somebody does make that complaint that it is a violation, and you have to address it in one of the fashions through the grievance process. Yes.
From a practical matter, then, if we have this many non-compliant areas and someone would allege a violation, our approach really is not to address it until it gets reconstructed. For the most part,
A lot of times what happens during the grievance procedure, if it's a violation that can be readily remedied, it's something the city could take on to replace a section of sidewalk. Maybe it's from the residence to the corner store, or somewhere that they routinely travel that they can't get to, there's a major barrier. So they would file a grievance, and then the city could look at that and say, we've got a plan to replace that in 2 years, that may be adequate. Or you might go in and say, we're gonna replace this half-block section of sidewalk so they can get to the market or get to church.
so do you feel we have a lot of readily remedied areas?
I think a lot of them are already being addressed through the current road reconstruction planning. It just really depends on how active the disabled community is and how many people there are. There's no ADA police. It's really, somebody that has a barrier that needs to get somewhere and they're not able to do that.
You're not licensed, right?
Yeah.
So if we have a lot of lips out there, would we be negligent not going out there and cutting them down?
You're not required to fix everything right now. That's not realistic, and the ADA legal people know that. They know that cities don't have the resources to go out and fix everything within a year or two period. That's just not reasonable, and that's why you develop a plan so the public can go, the city has a plan, it's here, they can read it, they understand that there's a process to it, and it's going to take some time.
So we update the GIS maps that you've provided us, and are we to review these each year at a city council meeting? Or is it supposed to be a procedure that we do something with this on an ongoing basis, or just put it in our capital plan?
There are no guidelines for how you, this should be a living document and it should be updated, but it's totally at the discretion of the municipality on how you keep it updated.
But there's no requirement to update it?
No, there's not.
Huh.
Does a self-assessment have to be done periodically?
I want to step back. I believe, don't quote me, and you could go to ada.gov and every answer, if you can negotiate that, you're a little more well-versed than I am because it's quite an animal, but I believe it's 10 years.
I think one item to comment on is, as an example, again, this is a working document, that we're doing improvements this year, so the intent is to actually update those data points, again, make them all green, not just turn them green, but actually collect that data. So my thought would be, if we're updating as we go, it will be an up-to-date document. The other comment I want to make is, again, I think this is a thought or comment when it comes to budgeting for next year, or again, we got a lot going on next year, or maybe for at least 2021, is to have some starting budget, we'll call it a seed budget, to address some of the more extensive ADA barriers. And again, as a working document, we can go out there and determine which ones we want to evaluate, and then figure out what budget would Public Works have to be able to address those. And I think it's kind of a first step to understanding how are we going to get to the end? You know, some things should be addressed with projects, some things maybe need to be addressed ahead of projects or independently.
But you said that 2012, they changed the rules, or they addressed it. I mean, are we looking at something in 2025 that all of a sudden now there's a whole new standard, and now you have just as many issues at that time?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think it's pretty extensive as the way it is. I don't know what else they're going to change. I can't imagine it.
Part of the misconception with ADA is I always hear that they keep changing it, right? And they've never really changed it, they just given it more definition. So a better understanding of what's required. It's not really changed, it's just better understanding of that. So I don't think they're gonna make it more stringent. If anything, they'll probably find some areas that maybe don't have to be quite as onerous as they are now.
Yeah.
Like, just like the 2% crosstalk to 3%. MnDOT's already made that call. They're gonna allow some crosstalk to sidewalks up to 3%. So I don't think they'll get more stringent.
Yeah, that's my opinion. I think as different agencies are getting into looking at making these decisions, I think there would be a little more variability in the tolerance, and not just it's not compliant.
Okay.
But Chris, for the council's benefit, then besides needing to have already had this essentially be done, it was also important to get it done in preparations for being eligible to receive our federal grant next year on our downtown highway project.
Yeah, good point, yes. Basically, as a requirement to utilize federal funding, for the city to receive federal funding, the city did need to have an ADA transition plan adopted. So it's not only good science, it's good to do, helpful and a working tool, but obviously was required for the downtown project. So again, we're good where we're at for timing wise, et cetera. So the other kind of the final item, I mean, you may have some questions, we can pose those, but the other kind of the end this is, I guess the recommendation is to post this or advertise this for public comment. I guess we had suggested a kind of a 30-day comment period. And then sometime in about 60 days or so, we would bring it back for basically final council approval to adopt the document.
So Mike, are you suggesting we should do a motion on that? And it's just,
I think we basically just have an action that we put it out there and solicit public comment for 30 days. And depending on what that is, that they would summarize what that is, bring that back before we would do the final adoption of this.
Okay.
Probably within 45 days then.
Okay.
Is the public comment going to be more succinct or pointed questions as opposed to what do you think of this, or is it more where do you see some of the major barriers in the city? What type of public comment would you be soliciting?
You could simply put the document out there to get a reaction, or you could put questions out there. There's no formula for what that public comment needs to be. That's up for the city to decide. Some questions like that might be warranted, so you could focus an area that may be a problem that you don't know about.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments?
We would probably intend to have the engineers describe just a little bit of what this is, what it's intended to do, and then just solicit public feedback or commentary about what they see or thoughts regarding ADA access throughout the community.
Okay. I think it's a consensus of council to move forward. Post this for public comment.
Yes, I agree.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So, and move forward with that action, that'd be great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Mike, are you just going to kind of update us on?
I'll let Ken do this since he's had on the technology.
Okay.
Check with the
So we did a little update even to the memo that I gave you from last Friday, but thinking back to June 20th, we had a special meeting with our consultant, True North, to kind of go over our IT needs and including equipment all the way through managed services of our computer systems, storage, and et cetera. And at that point, the council had voted to move forward with the development of an RFP and going out to bid for that equipment and IT services. So we were actually hoping to have the RFP document wrapped up. We met with True North on staff level, and actually on, I forget what day it was last week, Thursday or Friday, went over that one final time. And one of the final pieces of the puzzle was actually having city attorney review the RFP to make sure there wasn't anything missing there. And the update I have to give you today, even from the schedule that I indicated on the memo I wrote, was that the city attorney's office found that there was some contract type language within the RFP that they want to pull out and put in an actual contract document rather than mix the RFP with some contract language. So that is what we are going to be working on within the next week, is pulling out the contract related language out of the RFP into a separate document. And that should shorten up the RFP document, which is about 88 pages if you'd like to read that at this current time. I think we can narrow that down a little bit by next Monday, when we would hope to re-advertise for, or not by next Monday, next Thursday on the 15th instead of the 8th, to have that back out for public bidding. And then ultimately would like to have all the responses by September 12th for the company's proposed what they would do for their technology and IT services. So in a little over a month, we would hope to have that process wrapped up and back in front of the council, and maybe 2 to 3 weeks following that September 12th date. So maybe the end of September, maybe early October, to have the proposals in front of you to see what we received. We had a number of firms that did ask to get the RFP specifically, including the former CSSW, I forget the name that they're going by now.
Minnesota Technology.
Minnesota Technology, there you go. I was one of them, and a few other is in the area that we will be sending that to directly. It will be in the New Prague Times, as with any other solicitation that we've done in the past. And then True North has kind of their network of IT professionals and sites that they would post that to as well. So basically what I'm relaying to you is there's about a week delay from what I put in the memo, and shouldn't have any issue Scott's office pulling that language out of there and getting to the final version that we want to put out there. And at that point, we'll share the link with the council should you choose to want to read through that document. And it'll be about a month to 6 weeks from that point when we would bring that back to you.
So if I understand it correctly, just because I handle a lot of RFPs in my day-to-day job, the RFP is written such that the RFP does not become the contract. The contract will be a separate.
So how our consultant had written the RFP was to be kind of an all-in-one, all-encompassing RFP slash portions of it sort of become the quasi
Right.
contract, and that is what Scott's firm is recommending, is to pull that contract language out of there, because they do a lot of work for school districts and other firms that maybe aren't as particular as we are in that realm of things. But yeah, we didn't want any problems defending should something happen in the layout. I mean, this is a pretty important backbone of our operations.
No, and thank you, Scott. That's a very smart move.
Mike, is this going to give us ample time to get it in the budget?
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead. All right, well, thank you. Next, Mike, are you going to?
I'm going to start hopefully with Scott's help. We also have the applicant here tonight, Mr. Rich Novak is in the audience in case there's anything you want from him. If you recall, at the previous council meeting, July 15th, you had discussion on one of the premise extension requests from Mr. Novak that at a point in the discussion, he decided to withdraw the specific application request. And he, subsequent to that, this last week, submitted an application of items for the proposed event that he's wanting to hold on Saturday, October 5th, called Octoberfest from about 10 a.m. to 11 p.m. in a fenced-in area on the north side of his building. If you recall, City Attorney Scott Riggs, who was in attendance at that July 15th meeting, is also here tonight for not necessarily this matter directly. We've got another one in a special meeting that he will be. But as we had discussion that evening, and went through the materials, which I subsequently included again for your review, is in taking a look at how we attempt to move forward with these kinds of requests in conjunction or in comparison to other businesses that have had an outdoor seating or eating area for the consumption of alcohol or the eating of food. And in this case, this premises extension, besides going through the overview, which I'm gonna let Scott walk you through just a little bit again, is that I also try to anticipate, and I'll go through those details once we finish that discussion, that if the council were to consider moving forward, that I can address the particulars associated with Mr. Novak's request. So.
I'll jump in.
Thank you.
Mike asked, obviously I'm here for the special meeting on the other matter, but we sit in on this since we had this conversation before when I was here. And issues arose, we discussed briefly, developing a policy, how you want to deal with these types of events. I have a couple different policies, obviously we haven't gone beyond that, and you certainly can address this request right now. You've got others that it sound like are coming in as well. So it probably is a very sound idea to come up with an actual policy that will cover this type of situation, make it easy to look at, easy for staff to analyze, and then bring to you and say, here's our parameters for these types of events. When I look at the proposal, and we had a brief discussion on this before, some of the items proposed obviously require extremely overlapping areas in the city. And what I mean by that is liquor licenses, but then also additional provisions of liquor licenses that aren't allowed for presently existing licenses. So and what I'm referring to that is, if you have a on-sale restaurant type license, can you have a wine tasting? Can you have a sampling of wine, things like that? Well, again, our code doesn't deal with that. That's state statutory language that drives that. And that is a difficult issue to deal with. It really is. Most wine tastings, those types of events are paid events that are a specific amount of wine, beer, whatever it may be, can be served. There are different kinds of samplings that can go on from certain producers of alcohol. Again, very specific types of requirements that apply to those situations. The question is, do you want to get into policing that or being responsible for that? Because you are the entity, the city is the entity that enforces liquor regulations in the city. Some cities will not do that because of that. They don't want the responsibility, they don't want to deal with it. Other issues that come up with a proposal like this is how involved is the Department of Health when you have food service going on outside of a restaurant setting. Typically, and I think we have to do it for Dojinki days and other things, when people do outside vending, Department of Health has to come in and say this is all appropriate. And it sounds like that type of service would be going on here as well. Staff can look at all these issues. They've asked me questions regarding it. Mike obviously has a discussion in here of what types of parameters may be or should be for consideration when you look at approving this one. But it still gets back to what are you calling a community event, because that will affect what you can approve liquor-wise. Do you want to just approve these for any businesses, which, again, that would be outside the liquor license realm, but it does invoke zoning requirements, you're using parking lots, signage, all kinds of other things that overlap and require staff to deal with. So, yeah, that's my 2 cents on that, Mike. I don't know how much more you want to go on that.
No, there are a number of requirements that come up associated with the activities that Mr. Novak is asking about being able to undertake outside in his back parking lot, that from the perspective of the conditional use permit that is granted to other liquor establishments are there for their defined area for eating and consumption of alcohol. He's wanting to, as part of this one, as an example, wanting to have an outside band and activity with that event. And that condition under the CUP process for an outdoor patio area or an eating area requires music to be done at 10 p.m. Unless the council would undertake some other consideration outside of the realm of that. Most of the approvals that we've given in the past for premises extension have all been, and with the exception of the one that you granted for Rich earlier this year, have all had access coming through the business with consumption outside in the rear parking lot and then back through the business. Rich has wanted it where he's got the abilities to have access in and out of the rear parking lot in that fenced-in area, which requires the component of establishing security control in and out and wristbanding patrons and that to try to help deal with some of the compliance and the consumption and any underage drinking of that nature. So, you know, we don't have specific parameters that we're following, so we're having to look at every time an application comes in, we've got to sit down and take a look at what are the components or the requirements. Are there any other zoning or other downtown rules or regulations that come into play, and see how we want to deal with it in conjunction with that liquor license.
Mike, I'm going to recuse myself because of the relationship that I have with Mr. Novak and the fact that he's considering one of my company, or the company I work for, to partner with him on this while the council discusses that. So I'm going to step off.
You don't have to leave.
No, I'm going to sit right here.
Yeah.
Scott,
So-
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. So Scott, when you were talking about the wine tasting,
Yep.
so Mr. Novak has a license to serve alcohol.
Yep.
So that is vastly different than, let's say, the Coburn's liquor store setting up a stand with the
Right.
wine tasting.
That's a sample, and that's a very different provision that requires dealing with the liquor control of the state and going through a process for that as well. So yes, again, just having a on-sale license doesn't allow you to do all these different types of service elements, particularly if you're trying to do it in a setting of giving it away free. And alcohol and free don't go well with Minnesota law. That's just the reality.
Thank you.
Yep.
Scott, your memo to Mike and Jim and Ken, and you were, when you mentioned the statute 348-404, you talked about liquor off premise at a community festival.
Yep.
What I guess I was wanting clarification on is how you define off premise, because later on you mentioned that this might fit, but
Yeah.
I don't understand how this would fit under the statute.
Right, and keep in mind, this memo was done for really to direct the previous proposal where we were aware that the other event that we're now talking about may be coming up, and I said that it's possible, but I didn't have a lot of parameters of what that was dealing with.
Well, then maybe let's just talk about the subdivision 4B.
Okay.
And specifically then, when it talks about liquor off premises
Yeah.
at a community festival.
Correct.
It's written as if it's something not at the establishment.
Exactly.
Something's taking place.
Yeah, and that is what that
Like they-
statute covers.
So
Yeah.
it's not something on their own premises
No.
that this statute even is applicable to.
Not in this setting, that statute would not apply, that is correct. The
So-
only way you could do something along or akin to what's being requested, particularly at the site it is basically allow the compact and contiguous area of service for this licensee to be expanded to cover that parking lot.
Under what statute would we do what you just said?
Well,
Because I don't see a statute that fits what
It
you
really is
said.
saying you're going to allow the license to cover that. And is there a statute directly on point? Other than the statute, it's, I don't remember off the top of my head, it's 348-510, I believe, subdivision 7 says something to the effect that any license, the only service you can do is in a compact and contiguous area that's been approved by the council, whether it's the building itself, or as Mike was referring to, a patio area that becomes a defined definition of the licensing area, or in the request that's being made, it's the whole parking lot, which compact and contiguous area means you have to enclose it off, that the
Right,
general
that's-
public can't get in and out.
What you're referring to, is that really, that's not really dealing with a temporary license.
No, and it's,
That's really kind of more akin to our conditional use with patios.
right.
So that really wouldn't fit here either.
It doesn't fit well, and I think that's what I've been trying to tell Mike when he's asked me what works well under Minnesota Statutes Chapter 348 for what we're talking about. Not much. If this was a true community festival, and again, that's up to you folks to define what that is, Dojinki Days, pick any festival like that that involves a number of overlapping or interacting activities, that's where you see this other statute referring to 348-404 sub 4B, where a licensee comes from their business and then serves in a certain other place for the purposes of that festival.
Right.
It's not typically an economic endeavor. It really is for the festival purposes to allow this type of service.
Right, so this situation, we don't even deal with the community festival issue because it's on premise, so it can't be. You can't be there for the statute to apply.
Yeah, that's correct. I think you'd have to contort the statute to make it work for what we're talking about, yes. And what we've been talking about is trying to extend the overall licensing area under the license, which is not the better way to do this at all. And most cities do not do that.
So, when we offer, accept a temporary license like for a church festival, that's under different statute?
It is, yes.
Okay.
And those are 1 to 4 day intoxicating liquor licenses.
Oh, okay, so we're actually issuing a liquor license.
You are.
That
You're issuing
pertains to that.
For that event.
Okay.
Exactly. And you have to meet certain requirements, typically nonprofit, charitable, church, types of organizations like that that would qualify for that.
And as you mentioned earlier, I believe the brewer situation, that's a different statutory authority.
Absolutely. There's a whole other statute for that type of.
Subdivision 10C.
Yeah, and again, even for tastings, a brewery has a whole different statute from a wine tasting or a sample statute that allows certain other types of service for that up to a certain amount of alcohol as well.
Right, and that's what's confusing to me, is why can this happen over here, but we can't do that? And
Yeah.
we can't do this for him because this.
Right.
It's-
No, and I will never say that the Chapter 348 is a very easy thing to deal with. It's very complicated. Cities do the best they can with it, and it's why you'll see some events occur in one place, and somebody says, why don't we do it like that? Well, somebody got wind of it and said, did you really do it correctly? And the answer is no. And so it doesn't happen in the next city. And we do our best. We talk to liquor control as much as we can and say, how do you interpret and what do you recommend? How do we do this? Mike's tried to lay out a way that gets you there, but it's a way that basically is using the on-sale license that exists and just saying it's a much bigger area, which opens up a lot of liability questions, but that's for the person being insured to.
And because it's a business and it's not a charitable thing.
That's why it doesn't fall under these other
We
provisions.
couldn't have a 1-day special permit to include.
Right, it wouldn't fit, it would meet these other requirements that need to be in the statute, charitable, religious, all these types of, clubs, those types of things can do that.
So this, I don't want to throw 1,000 scenarios, but the charitable organization that he's working with, if they didn't apply for the liquor license, if they didn't buy 3 cases of beer,
There's a possibility, I mentioned that.
Liquor or a
Yeah.
temporary license then.
Yeah.
Because they're charitable and they're doing it, not, and it's not their property, so they could make it a festival.
And that's a possibility that I mentioned to Mike, that it may be a more reasonable approach, that if this actually is a, you know,
Community festival.
a community festival for that purpose, and you have this nonprofit doing that, that would work and fits the statutory structure much better. Correct. But then again, it's not then a commercial enterprise where the licensee is coming in and doing its normal business operation. Different requirements are imposed at that point in time.
Right, and that's why you kind of have to skirt around.
Yeah, and that's the point. A charitable organization or a nonprofit can do certain things because they are a nonprofit. They're not a business entity.
But in this case, he's working with his
Yeah.
nonprofit entity that oversees his whole gambling operation, and that collectively, it's a joint activity, Rich, between you and German Days.
German Days is the main sponsor.
But it's done to enhance the operations and bring in people for the benefit of the liquor operation for the day.
Actually, according to the German Days, the way it's set up, it's actually benefiting the New Prague businesses. That's how it's all set up.
In what way?
Because they're invited to come down to there and market their businesses. This is what they've been doing in Belle Plaine for 20 plus years.
Okay, and I can't speak to how Belle Plaine does it, that...
Well, Teresa's here from German
I
Days.
understand she's
She
here,
can
but
explain to you how that works.
we haven't had the benefit of looking at it and understanding that as we've talked with you, you've aligned with her to, under your existing liquor license, to be able to expand your premises to enable a number of different other events and activities to go on that day.
Correct, but that's with a number of local businesses that are going to be involved in their marketing their business as well. This isn't just pointed at me for the success of my business. This is how this whole thing is set up, and that's how the letter was that we promoted, that we sent in the last time we submitted, that explained that they're exactly how we planned what we were proposing to do.
And we understand that, but that also does augment and bring additional people to your liquor establishment, which does help you for the course of the day by doing all of these different activities at the liquor establishment.
That's correct. But it's also, again, a lot of local businesses in town. Is that not what the city of New Prague wants? We're not supposed to promote the other businesses in town?
That's not the issue in the issuance of the liquor license. That's not one of the factors that we consider in that part of the licensing process.
And the other question I had too is with, when you say that now that if we're looking to extend into our back parking lot, that opens up a whole new alignment of insurance coverage. How does that change anything from when my insurance coverage already is covering every inch of my property, parking lots, alleys, everything?
We've had this ongoing dialogue and discussion, and I'll attempt to, for the council's benefit, to try to answer it this time, is that although you have insurance for your entire premises, the licensed premises, as Scott has indicated, the compact and contiguous, is the building. He is not licensed under our liquor license that we have issued him to sell liquor or consume liquor outside of that premises. So the licensed premises is the building, not the parking lot. So when we do the premises extension, whereas in the case of, let's use Carboni's Pizza and Carboni's is an example. Their licensed premises, because they've gotten a conditional use permit, their building premises or licensed premises not only includes their building, but the licensed area that's added to their liquor license for the outdoor seating area that was approved by the conditional use permit. Because there is no conditional use permit on your property, your licensed premises is only the building. And so for insurance purposes, to ensure that we as a city don't get drawn into an event or an activity that's occurring on an area of the property that is not the licensed property, that being the building, that's why, per Scott's recommendation, is we elicit from your insurance carrier the additional defined area of coverage for that particular day to ensure that that gets added to your normal liquor license insurance for the specifics of that day, to ensure that coverage is not missed and that it's being expanded for that one particular day. That's why the difference of what we have to do with this.
Under the scenario that Bruce put out there, where it would be if we were to just have him lock his back door and just use his parking lot for German days, and they did all their, wouldn't it fit under that scenario that Bruce put out, where it was a non-charitable, or a charitable,
If you have, yeah, if there is a nonprofit organization that meets the statute requirements, I don't know if they do, but we can figure that out. That's a possibility, but again, it has to be deemed a community festival. If you're willing to deem that a community festival, that's up to you.
But just to clarify, if the community group applies for these liquor licenses,
Yes.
it's not the same.
Yeah, you'd have to have a separate license issued for that.
yeah, but we could issue
It's
a
a temporary
temporary
license, it's temporary.
and literally lock his door. But see, you know, as an example, Belle Plaine is a great example. I mean, they have that where all the vendors put up, you know, stands, and you can go through and get free food, and then you can go in and out of the bars and get beer all you want. And I'm just wondering, you know, why that works for the state there, but this don't work for the state here.
Is that because, Rick, the vendors are set up off the side of the property of the establishment selling the liquor? So for instance, it would be on their main street, or it would be in one of their parks, as opposed to, in Mr. Novak's case, it would be using his parking lot for the event.
Yeah, but he's donating that to this charitable organization. If they had this event and he locked that back door, so it really wasn't even part of the Czech'ers, you know? It would only be him donating the parking lot or the room for the.
But then we'd be issuing a liquor license for that.
Right,
deal. That would be the difference.
right.
And could that liquor be sold through Mr. Novak's establishment?
No, but you would have to do something separate. I mean, if
Thank you.
you're gonna break the two up into two different entities is what you're doing, you know what I mean? It's, he's simply donating his parking lot.
Yeah, I don't know what Belle Plaine does. We certainly can attempt to figure that out. As I've said, not every event that's out there is run perfectly. My job is to tell you what works with your ordinances, your statute, and protects from a liability standpoint what we have. If there's a way to do that, and they set it up, and they've got nonprofits doing that in some capacity, that's fine. I don't know what licenses have been issued for that purpose.
And I just have one other question that you had mentioned about the food trucks, that the Department of Health usually has to come in and approve. But don't food trucks already have?
Not the food trucks, that's not.
If I said food trucks,
Yeah, but that's
Oh,
not
yes.
the concern.
Okay.
It's the businesses that I believe, if you read the materials, if we read them correctly, is that you would have businesses being donating cooked food that they would bring in, and they would be given electrical connections, and they would put food on the table and give that away from 3 to 5 p.m., correct? That's what's in the outline of the materials that you gave us. So in that, the question becomes, is that from a food safety standpoint, are there, and I raised it to the wife, that whether any of the health conditions would have to be dealt with or looked at with Scott County. We certainly weren't going to necessarily deal with that issue, but we're wanting to make them aware of that they probably need to look at that to ensure that there are no issues.
Thank you.
There is a list here of 11 items. If he was to go through and abide by these, would he be able to go off of that if he went by these guidelines?
Let me give you an update from when we provided this, just so you have that. Under number 7, the band or music is, I don't have no abilities to do anything other than to tell you that under the downtown ordinance for outdoor restaurants and drinking establishments, that music would have to be discontinued at 10 p.m., required to be shut down at 10 p.m. unless you did otherwise. You heard from Scott earlier that he believes it's in question and probably will not be allowed as far as the free beer and wine tasting. The premises map has been provided, the certificate of insurance has been provided, and the banners are not an issue. So most of the items are effectively taken care of. Really the only one, assuming Scott still believes that no free beer and wine tasting would be the music issue, what the ordinance requirement is 10 o'clock unless you saw fit to choose
Right,
to do
so
otherwise.
if he complied with all these requirements, would the city be okay with it? Would the attorney be okay with it?
As has been done in the past, then yes.
My point was that it would not be in compliance with the state statute because it's on premises.
What Mike was referring to is extending the premises to encompass the entire parking lot under his existing license, is what he's talking about. That's not a community festival, that's not what that wouldn't be covered under any of the statutes that you and I were talking about before. It's basically saying his business is now encompassing this entire area.
And so that's where the
For
liability
that
would
one
come
day,
in.
Except for a conditional use permit.
Yeah, well, that's it, and you typically have done it with a conditional use, that's what Mike is
And
saying.
excuse me,
Yeah.
not always, that we have done in the past, we've done other outdoor premises extensions. One was done for City Club a number of years ago when he did a fireworks fundraiser for the fire department fireworks. Predecessor to Rich and Czech'ers, JT's. I think for 3 years running that they had one or two events. One was a business appreciation event that they held, and another one was a fundraiser for, Jim, you remember, fundraiser for, it was some community event or activity that they did, beanbag tournament, and then had a fundraiser. And then last year, for the first time, we granted the premises extension, again, albeit a little bit different with a different license at Isenbrow outside there. But in most cases, we haven't had but more than one or two events on an annualized basis at a particular location. And in most cases, there hasn't been any more than about 2 a year generally. So the frequency of that hasn't really been an issue. And as we deal with Rich and his, he's coming up with different activities and things of wanting to do within the scope of that, requiring us to take a look at every time it comes in. Are all of the activities eligible to be done?
Is there a way that we can see what the council said about the City Club event, and go off of that standard? I mean, what, these German days,
All of
why
those-
are they any different than?
No, the items that we have for this one are the same types of items that we have consistently used in all of these prior premises extensions, so it's not any different. With the exception of wanting to introduce the band and the music, that one is different, we haven't had that before. The comings and goings and the regulation as far as the access point outside versus just totally coming from within the building, using the outside and then going back to the building. Rich was really the first one earlier this year where that has been authorized. This is now a second time. So, but the insurance and all of the other items are consistent and have been in all the other premise extension requests.
So do you have a specific recommendation on action? Are we denying it based, is the attorney saying deny it, or you're not recommending to deny it?
No.
You're just
Again,
saying
keep in mind,
the-
I wasn't even here for this purpose, but he brought me in on it.
All right.
The reality is, what I'm saying is you need a policy. You need, so staff can look at these consistently, which I think staff has been attempting to do that, but it gets down to, you get a slippery slope on what becomes a community festival. And I've got a couple communities that found them, they were in that boat, trying to figure out what to do, and they adopted an annual resolution that said, these items are community festivals. I have another city that has a very detailed policy on what special events are allowed for businesses, nonprofits, quasi-nonprofits, et cetera. They get down to very good detail on that. And they also approve generally what they're going to do beforehand. And they don't have it as, this month, this one comes in, a month later, something else comes in. They require 60 days notice so they can go through the process, make sure they're evaluating which or what type of license might be needed to be modified to allow it to occur. And that at least gets staff out of the business of saying, wait, we're just trying to look at this ad hoc every time and we move forward. I have a couple policies I said I'll leave with Mike, and that's, I think, the starting point for you. And that is my recommendation for the council, to consider that to make it easier for staff and people coming in to know, here's exactly what has to happen if you're going to have this type of event.
So you're talking about policy, you're not talking an ordinance?
Some of it would involve potentially amending ordinances, and as Mike's referring to, you've got right now a requirement that the band stop at 10 p.m. If somebody comes in and says, Rich says, by the way, if we allow it till 11, this is what's going to happen, I'll be able to have these types of events, that may make sense to change that. So you'll have to consider those as well.
As far as the comings and goings that Mike mentioned, it's no different for this event than it would be, than it was for the previous event we had. We had people working security at the front door, and we had people working security at the back gate. This was set up the same way and proposed it the same way, and it would be done the same way that we had there. And we had zero issues with anything, that whole event.
What's the rationale of having people leave the back end? Why can't everyone just have one access point?
Number one is, I think when you draw that amount of people, if you had only one exit out of the parking lot or through the building to get out of the parking lot, I'm not so sure that would be, I don't know what the fire or the health and fire department or fire code would read if we have only one entrance in and out of the building. Number two, it's a lot easier for that many people that you have there to be able to leave the parking lot. That's what we had the last time, is because then we didn't have to have people shuffling through the building to go through. And they were able to use the back door, and I had security people at the back gate, my north gate, from the time we started till the time we ended. And I had the same thing at the front door, and we ID'd at both of them. We used bracelets to identify who was 21, who was not 21. Everybody in the building knew who was of age to drink and what.
And we had no identifiable issues or concerns with that, other than this is the first one he had, June, I think it was. That's the first time we've had that issue dealt with, and that's how, working with the PD, we came up with on how to address handling that.
Do you have any input, Jim?
And as far as the conditional use permit goes, sir, that you're talking about, how long does it take to get a conditional use permit? How fast would one be turned? I mean, my line right now is to move forward with a conditional use permit, but from what I gathered from the last meeting, there's no way it would be done in order for us to be able to have enough time to market this event that's going on. We need time to do that.
60-day time frame from time you have a complete application, we have to act on that.
And so that would never, and that won't work. That's what I assumed for the last meeting. So that's why I'm proceeding with the way we are. I think I've met every one of the qualifications that are been asked of on this thing, have all been here, have all been submitted. I have approved the banners through Ken today. I don't know of anything on here that's not being met compared to our last one. And I guess in my eyes, when they say it's a community festival, is it something we're gonna be asked to call it German Days Community Festival? Is that what they'd rather have? Because it is involving local New Prague businesses that are coming here to promote their businesses as well. They're being paid through German Days. There's no other organization around that, I don't know how much you guys know about German Days, but for what they do and have been doing for us since we've opened, and what they're actually doing with the business, they're actually paying these local businesses to come there and promote their businesses for free. That's what it comes down to. And then since they started with us in our gambling association, we've donated $2,500 to this point, which we have another quarter coming up now. We've donated $2,500 to local non-profit organizations within the city limits of New Prague. We've got $2,500 since that started, since January 1st. So you won't find that with other pull-tab organizations and gambling associations. They're set up and it's one place where all the money goes into the one organization. Through German Days, the money comes back to them, and then the profits that we have from there come back to us to basically pick and choose which people in New Prague are looking for proceeds. And what they do is they fill out a request form. The request form goes to Teresa's meeting and their board, and they decide which ones, which quarter, get how much money. And the checks are cut and they're issued to them. We've actually just given out our last check this past Thursday to the last nonprofit. We have pictures taken with every one of those, and those will be going in the paper so that people can see that
So what we propose to do and what we said we're gonna do is actually happening. Because people within the city of New Prague don't believe that, because they claim having German days as a outside organization doing our gambling, that none of those proceeds will come back to New Prague. Well, we've given back more to probably multiple organizations in this town than anybody has yet doing poll taps, because it all goes to one organization. This we're feeding, we have the ability to just feed every separate nonprofit that we want within the city limits.
Are you working through the Commerce Department then to get these businesses together, or is that how it works, or you actually scouting it out?
I approached Brooke at the chamber office to see if they wanted to do some kind of partnership. She said they wouldn't, because it's too close to Dzinky Days. They didn't want any type of partnership with it, but she said, we will back you 100%. We will market for you. We'll help you with promote it, anything you need to do. But she said, we won't be able to take part in it with you.
And Mike, your health department issue was what again?
It's not my.
No, I know, but the one you pointed out.
From the consumer's perspective, and again, we don't know, and it's not city regulation, but if you're having businesses cook or do whatever with food and bring it over, and it's supposed to be dispensed from 3 to 5, they can hook into electricity, but if you have a hot day, 80, 85 degrees, depending on what the temperature is, you've got health things to consider. When we do Dojinki here, or the chamber does, Department of Health from Scott County or LeSueur County comes in and goes through every one of the vendors up and down Main Street. And so all I did is I passed on to the business that they may want to check into that to ensure from a food safety, because they're not cooking any of the food on premises, taking it outside to make it available. It's coming from off premises, sitting there for a period of time. Does that mean all of the county health requirements? So that's not something we're going to enforce. We just want to make them aware of that so that they can look into that to see what they need to do to comply with those requirements, just from a health standpoint.
Right, and we've been doing it in Beltane for over 20 years, and that's never been addressed. Not that it's ever been an issue, right? It's been very successful. The community loves it. We get thousands of people in, not thousands, but quite a few. And it's just, everybody loves the event.
It's always been my experience from my past that a gathering of over 500 people and there's alcohol involved. It's always nice to, excuse me, it's always nice to have law enforcement nearby, you know. So is there anything from your standpoint that you can see on that? How much extra would you have to charge these guys to have a patrol car sitting there monitoring, making sure nobody leaves the premises with alcohol for public intoxication or public?
Well, that would be up to the council if they wanted to make that a stipulation of allowing the activity. I mean, our scheduled fee is $75 an hour for an officer, or $85 with a squad. But like Mike said earlier, the stipulations we have listed here, plus or minus, I mean, because of the banner issue came up, some of them were added in there, but generally, these same stipulations were always followed for every previous one that was authorized. And the whole idea is, because we are the entity that allows for the licensing based on state statute, we have to control the alcohol sales and make sure they're appropriate and lawful. So that's why we put in those controls to attempt to do that we don't have minors accessing alcohol. And Rich, no doubt, has always been easy to work with on the previous event. And we did not see any problems or run across any issues or concerns from that event at all.
And just so we can get through this, and then we know that we have to do some policy making, you know, and so that there's a written policy. You know, maybe you do this annually or something, you know. So I don't know, but I would like to do this, you know what I mean? I don't want to get the city to get tangled up in any liability or health department issues. That was the other concern I had.
And this is the last event that we are going to plan from the outside, just because of the complexity of everything going through it this way. Initially, now my plan is to go through a conditional use permit. Again, from the last meeting, I knew that there's no way we could hit this date, so that's why we proceeded the way that we were doing it. And just to make sure that everybody in the council is aware of the way we're planning to use our parking lot. This isn't something, when we're talking more of a permanent structure, I'm not looking to give up my parking lot 24/7. My parking lot is only gonna be used if something like this comes up. If an event comes up, if it's once, twice, or 3 times a year, that's the only way. I don't have a problem moving forward and putting up some other type of different fencing on the east and the west property sides and run that up to the end of the alley. But at the top, I'm still gonna have some kind of a gate that's gonna open up because I don't wanna give up 12 or 13 parking spots in my parking lot because of those vehicles are on the city streets.
Not to mention, don't you have residents above it?
And I have renters above me as well, and the neighboring renters that use my parking lot too.
Oh, okay, then they, yeah.
Well, they're not supposed to, but they.
Donnie and them guys. I don't know. I'm okay with it, but I don't know.
Just a question for German Dave. So up in Belle Plaine, is the event held on a city street?
It
Or
is.
it's expanded?
Yes, so we actually applied for a large assembly permit.
Okay.
It's very specified as to what events with diagrams. It talks about, you know, your insurance liability, police, kind of touches everything, which is good. I mean, maybe that'd be something,
Well,
would you
that-
rather us apply for that?
No, it sounds like what they're having is really kind of our Dojenki event on the
Correct.
streets.
Right, correct.
And there you issue a 1 to 4 day license, which is really 2 days to the Chamber of Commerce. It's a community festival, and you set for the parameters, other than the one expanded one you have, is that you kind of have consumption of alcohol in all of the public right away is allowed.
Consumption, not selling.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Well, in this case, the consumption is, yeah,
Correct.
in a large, unprotected or undefined area that is pretty much all of the public right of way, and that they sell from the beer garden, so.
See, I just can't see the difference between what they want to do and what St. Patrick's does. I mean, you know, I hate to start.
It's a church.
It's a church, so it's
No,
not.
It's a different statute.
It's a
not-
different license, it's a different license that comes into play.
There's, there's 4 pages, the statutes, 8 pages, and there's different subdivisions for each different things. Churches, breweries are different.
Right.
Liquor
Do
Well,
you-
we're not selling any alcohol.
Do you actually get a
So,
license for Belle Plaines? Or you
No, 'cause we're not
ask the
selling.
bars to do the
Right.
selling for you?
correct. They have to, you can bring it out, we block the streets off, so it is allowed to have open container outside, but no selling outside.
So they created a community festival and opened up the street area for that from the existing liquor stores and the
But
premises.
there's no sales going.
Yes.
Well, I guess I have to say that I'm okay with Mr. Nowak moving forward with the Octoberfest event, needing to address the music, and of course the free beer and wine tasting, which is.
Those are the
something
only 2 items that are open.
Right. You know, with the fact that, Rich, you had mentioned that you would like to move forward with the conditional use permit, and that's very encouraging.
Well, it'll give me time to do it till spring
Right.
because I won't have anything else planned. It's just, I know now from 2 weeks ago at our meeting, from what I heard, there's no way it was ever gonna happen now, so I couldn't proceed.
And
So-
then, depending on how this all works out, that would work into how we could sit down and come up with
Our
a
policies.
policy on normal practice. I mean, because one of the situations is that your frequency in requesting special permission. But I don't see anything wrong with this, as long as you, I would probably, whoever's gonna make a motion, put a stipulation in there that in addition to the bouncers at the doors, that the law enforcement be present, and even if you wanted to go as far as $85 an hour to have a whole.
No, I don't agree with that,
It
Rich.
really would not be necessary that they're gonna have sporadic inspection, just like we would do at any liquor establishment. And if he's following through on doing the items that we've got up above, of essentially 1 through 6, then he's effectively already doing that. In lieu of doing that, the alternative could be under the policy, but then that's gonna be a whole lot more costlier option to the liquor establishment. But we don't necessarily absolutely need to have an officer doing the checking at the gate unless the council felt they wanted to become overly restrictive in that sense. So we had no issues with how his previous event went.
And I agree with Rick. I think based on, past history, that's been good. You're in the business to sell alcohol. You're clearly very sensitive to serving underage individuals. So I wouldn't include that as a stipulation. If something got out of hand and we saw a pattern, then that's a different
Well,
story.
his ongoing license is predicated on he has this stuff in the first place.
Rich, I don't have any problems with the merits of the German days or your establishment. I think you're running a good business. I just want to be comfortable that it fits into the statutes, and I don't see it fit into the community festival statute. So that doesn't really apply to it. So if we're trying to talk about extending the premises, then in my opinion, it may be something as a one-time deal. We're not set up to handle this in a conditional use even at this point in time. We don't have that structure policy even out there yet.
Correct, that's why I'm asking to proceed this way now, so that we can go down that road in the first possible event, maybe in May or June of next year. I've got time for me to do my part of it, which Ken's saying 60 days, as long as your formats are set up of what you're looking for, and it's gonna be something possible. I wanna pursue that. I wanna see what the costs are, I wanna see what it all involves.
I'm concerned.
But let's be clear in that regard before we leave that, is that conditional use permit isn't going to give him what he wants to do. You heard that he wants to keep the parking lot open to be able to use that for comings and goings. The conditional use permit for outdoor, either outside dining or consumption of alcohol, is a place to go out and to sit within a defined geographic
Yes, and that's my point. We
area. Where
don't even
he's
have a
wanting to
conditional
come and
use you
going
can apply
between the
for.
two. The conditional use permit isn't going to give him
Right.
that.
We don't even have a conditional use you could apply to get to do what you want to do.
Yeah, not using the parking lot
So
under
we're
the
not
conditional
doing
use
that.
permit. It has to be a permanent designated space that essentially is the extension of your premises.
Correct, and that's what will be taking place in the alleyway between my building and the neighboring building. That was my initial plan to do, but I don't want to close that off yet because of the streetscaping project that's coming in 2020. We're planning on redoing the alley and running an underground drain system through there, so I don't want to close it off and do anything more permanent there until that's completed, so I can put in a drain system there as well.
And your comment about the access point, I guess I don't agree with that, but I guess I want to support you as much as possible, but you can certainly make an access in the back for emergencies to have somebody watch and open it for people to leave if there's an emergency. But to be consistent with the way the city planning and zoning and conditional use for patios, they're all enclosed. They all require you to come through the same access point. So safety is an issue when you release people through an alley to me. So I guess that would be a concern.
It would be through an alley.
Your back parking lot isn't on an alley.
My gate that I put up there is 14 feet from the alley. I actually could have gone all the way to the alley, but when I set up my fenced in area, I stayed 14 feet away from the alley. I just explained to Jim the reason why I did it. Jim, remember? I just said that if there was people with handicapped vehicles or anything that wanted to drop off,
There's other
the
reasons
alley
why
right there.
that was created, imagine, as far as our conditional use to require it. And I believe the other ones that you mentioned, Mike, were all enclosed as well. They didn't release, had separate access points.
No, the access point is from the inside out
Right.
to the patio. Then there is emergency escape capabilities out of there, but it's not a coming and going type
Right, so
access
that's what we've
point.
done in the past, is number one. And for those types of things, and our conditional use requires it as well for patios, I believe.
Yes, we've done that for the
So-
patios.
So my point is that to be consistent the way we've done this before, that's what I would support, instead of having a second entrance point there.
The conditions that were developed by Jim out of PD was an acceptable alternative. We didn't have, I don't know that we had in those requests, the need by those users at the time when we approved those premises extensions. I don't think they looked at the size and the scope of the event, similar to what Rich is doing, that would have necessitated the abilities to police and have comings and goings from another access point.
The only stipulation we added, because he wanted an access point there for the previous event, was that they must be manned by security. And the whole idea of carding and bracelet handing out based on their age happen at that point then, because it was another access point.
Why do you suppose our current conditional use requirements are that you have an enclosed patio?
That
You
is.
can't go in and
that-
out of, is that what you're?
Right.
It was to make sure that minors weren't coming and going from where the wait staff or the bartenders couldn't see it.
Okay.
That's the reason.
So if it was manned with security, we agreed at that point that that was fine, and we did have that, and I paid them, you know, they were my own people that we hired, that we paid out of our pocket for.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, where do we go from here?
Well, I'd like to make a motion to approve the Czech'ers sports bar request, including the above conditions, but I think what we need to also have discussion on is the music, the end time of the music. Our ordinance is 10, and Mr. Novak would like to extend it to 11 p.m.
I don't think we should change that. I mean, can't stop at 10.
Again, we just adjust all the events that we have before that, because all the events were set up on timeframes leading to that. We would just have to start it an hour earlier, which would push everything else up an hour earlier for what things that we're looking into.
And then what about your rewind?
Yeah, well, based on what we've heard, it seems to be that that's possibly not likely, so I would probably suggest to not allow that to occur.
So what happens if, so the only way it would be approved if we charge for it, is that what you're saying? We have to charge for it in order for it to be allowed?
You have to determine if you can do it under your license. The statute for taste testing has its own statute on who has the authority to get that license and put on that event. Generally, the state of Minnesota has maintained that that event is for nonprofit organizations to do that. And that's where you see somebody sponsor it that's a nonprofit, and then they charge $25 for this event. And by statute, it can't go more than 4 hours.
So that's how like the liquor stores and stuff like that do the.
Well,
is that what they-
some of the liquor stores are samples, so that's a little different. Under a distributor, somebody could come in there and distribute their alcohol as samples only, but that's a smaller volume that they're doing. The taste testing sampling is, I think, 4 ounces for beer. And that's how it's distributed then. But the state of Minnesota, in their infinite wisdom, decided that an event like that should be for nonprofit entities. That's how they should function, through a nonprofit. To be in compliance, could German Days apply for a taste testing and do that? They probably could and hold that event on their own.
Teresa said they have
But-
their insurance policy and all their stuff too, so they have $2 million insurance policy, they have all that as well in place.
But whether the council wants to just say no taste testing, or the taste testing must be in compliance with state statute.
State chat, yeah, I was gonna say in compliance with applicable law. So, let's first address the music. Do you,
Change it to 10. If he's willing to change it to 10.
and I think that's reasonable. 11, because there are renters above and in other rental units in the downtown area, I would think that 10 o'clock is a reasonable time. And then the free beer and wine tasting can only occur under applicable law.
So that would be 4 ounces, is that what you said?
We don't have to worry, we don't have to worry about that, whatever the statute.
We don't know the law.
So is that's your motion?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we got a motion to approve the event, keeping the 10 o'clock as music, and then if they would to continue with free beer and wine tasting would be under applicable or state statute, right?
Right. Same.
Okay, so we got a motion. Does anyone want to second that?
So let me make sure I understand, so the resolution is calling for an extension of the liquor license contingent on these 11 conditions.
Right.
With the change in condition.
As modified.
7
And 8.
and 8.
7 would stay at 10 o'clock, which is our city.
Or is only on this one day.
Correct.
Correct.
Any other questions? So we got a motion,
Second.
and I got a second by Rick Seiler. If there's no other comments, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Okay. Sorry for being such a pain.
okay.
Good luck.
Okay, thank you.
Can we, at this point, say, tell staff to start working on policy of...
But I think we'll probably be going down.
Well, and I think as well, just for clarity for us for future, is what is the conditional use permit going to cover, not going to cover, and what would my alley between the two buildings be considered if I was to close off both ends of that as well, because that is going to be my outside, basically my permanent outside dining area where people can go out and smoke and they can go out and do their.
That would be the conditional use permit would cover that. That's always permanently enclosed. I think if any of your back parking lot, I think that still would not be covered under the CUP because that isn't the intent of the CUP. CUP's got to be a permanently enclosed area that's on your liquor license that's renewed every year. I don't think you can have something that opens and closes, but wouldn't be allowed. That's my understanding.
And you would still be at, if you have intention of utilizing the rest of the parking lot behind it, it would still be an extension of the premises.
Correct. So there's nothing that, like at the last meeting, they talked about a different type of a license or something that was going to have to come into play for that back parking lot. Is that not the case anymore?
I don't know who talked about a different
Because
license.
there was,
Well, yeah,
they said my
we
current
did
license,
talk
they
about
said
it,
my
and
current
you-
license
Oh.
didn't
Then
cover
you
the
said you were
anything.
thinking about putting that, the alleyway, turning that into a patio, enclosed patio
Well,
area.
that's the conditional.
That's the
use
conditional
permit,
use
yeah.
permit, but they were saying my back parking lot, that my current liquor license didn't cover my back parking lot, but there was a special license I had to go and reapply or refile for. a
That wasn't
different
your license,
with
that
the
was
state.
your insurance.
No,
My insurance
there
is
was some
everything
discussion. You may want to contact the state.
Yeah, going to the state, I think it came up from the attorney's discussions, but ultimately, you have an on-sale liquor license that covers your premises, which is, according to the state, your building, because it's an on-sale liquor license, and then you also have an off-sale also. But the sale of alcohol for your premises is within your building.
And if you obtain the conditional use permit for that area that's defined and gets added with the CUP issued, then that would become part of the licensed premises. But the area to the north or out the back still would not be part of the licensed premises.
And unless you wanted to permanently enclose that
Yeah.
area, that's,
The whole area,
but
yeah.
it sounds like you don't want to.
Not the
Probably
parking
do
lot.
that.
Or part of it.
Because I'll just
No,
lose
so
all
we
the parking
can't
spots.
can't get you there.
So how does it affect anything or change anything if I do not have off sale?
No,
No.
That doesn't affect it?
No,
He can answer.
it's the on-sale liquor license.
yeah.
Okay,
And then-
Okay,
thank you.
all right, thank you.
And the whole issue with the insurance. I know you're covering something, but this kindly covers everything.
Conditional use permit for this,
You just want to circulate the insurance.
if we don't have anything in place,
A policy, yeah, so.
This is a premises extension or license, or license extension request, which is different than Giza, that's a different
Right,
subdivision.
right.
Churches
Well,
are separate subdivisions, and it really only impacts this.
No, they try to save them, yeah.
I think it might make sense to just put a
That's why.
moratorium on these types
They're
of
all
events
coming
until we get a nice,
We want a
clear
policy, or
policy.
conditional-
Said he had a certain-
Conditional use it allows
That
a
says it's
hearing
fine.
process.
And that's all.
Correct.
It's confirmed.
And you're not giving the benefits that by doing this.
Right.
And there's neighbors, they don't, everything goes well.
I just need a certificate.
The public doesn't have the opportunity to speak.
No, I mean, it is true that you're talking about a land use, and, you know, I'll defer to Ken on that, but the reality is you're extending the use that was in the building to the land use area outside of the parking lot. And sure, you could come up with conditional use requirements for that purpose, and treat it similar, but with other requirements from the permanent patio situation, which we already do cover with the CUP. So it is possible, yes.
But maybe I misspoke, we should, if we're not gonna do a conditional use permit, we don't need to do that process, is what you're saying. But we should have a policy, and we should.
Well, I think I was referring to the policy from the standpoint of any special event, because this falls under the category of a special event. It could be a community festival. I'm going to leave with Mike a very good policy that he can start with, that is fairly all-encompassing, all kinds of events for nonprofits on through business-type entities, and it has various requirements, just like Mike and Jim and Ken laid out already, but other ones saying you need to meet these requirements, so they're not, I don't want to say negotiating, but having to look at it anew every time. Somebody can look at that, come in and say, yeah, I can meet that, I can do that. I know I have to have the insurance that does this. I know I have to be shut down by this point in time. I know that for service issues, I have to have security of, you know, this type of relationship. And access point, which is a huge question, is covered in this fashion, because most times it is only one access. There are emergency exits, as you were saying. That's usually how it is done.
The requests in the past have been relatively simple. There was no dual access issue. The extent of the consumption was people would buy inside and come out and go outside and consume in the back parking lot. And at most, there was kind of a beanbag toss. What we've seen in the two with Rich is an expansion of the activities and the uses, you know, with the band and the food and other things. It's just getting that much larger, and not knowing the scope of what the attendance could be is that you do start impacting the neighborhood, and it's not all controlled under what the outside premises under the CUP would regulate. So it's pushing us into an arena that's far more than what we've traditionally reviewed and approved generally in the past.
And I'm only speaking to the situation if we're faced with the same question 2 months from now or not prepared.
Well, we just set a precedent right now, so.
I don't feel we did.
Number one, there is no requirement to do it in the first place. If you are going to do it, Scott has indicated we have a right to set the appropriate criteria to expand and ensure that the compacted contiguous nature of the licensed premises is adequately addressed when you go to expand it. So there is nothing that, because you've done it once, everybody else gets to do it that way. That's not necessarily the case.
And that's why we need the policy. Yeah.
Okay, I think we beat that one. Glenn, let's talk about meetings.
Talk about what?
Just- Are you taking this next one?
I think
Glenn did all the work on it. I just happened to summarize in the memo for your consideration. If you recall, back on July 1st, there was an inquiry by Council Member Ryan that the council ultimately took action on to take a look at, see what we could do to update or add the population number changes to the MnDOT entrance signs. The initial contact resulted in, well, we could replace the sign at just under $550 a sign. We said, no, that really wasn't what we were asking. We simply wanted the population number change. They came back and said that they could do it for about $240 a sign, but that, again, according to their policy, we are not allowed to install those signs, that they would have to do that. So to accomplish what the council directed us to take action or to take a look at back in the first meeting in July, is to expend about $1,000 to change the 4 population signs, with the understanding that we're gonna get a new population number next year again. That's effective dating back to April of 2019, we'll receive in 2020, and then the next one will come out with the 2020 census that likely we'd see in 21. So if you went ahead and did it this year, the population number is gonna change again next year. And so if you wanna spend just under $1,000 to go out and change that. We didn't think that in light of that kind of turnover that it was worth doing, but we'll put that back in your laps to decide what you prefer to do.
Okay, any comments?
You know, it's not worth $1,000, but I find it hard to believe that a sticker costs $236 from MnDOT.
It's a metal plate.
It is.
It's a metal plate.
The one I saw in Independence today, right off Highway 12, had little air bubbles in it. It was just a sticker.
Well.
But anyways, again, we beat this one to death.
Yes.
So I thought it'd be great to.
One is not our sign. It's not our right away.
I got it. It's really all of our signs, because we all pay state taxes that pays for it. So we just were gonna take a little liberty with it as a city, but it's done. Let's move on. I'm not gonna over $1,000. That's ridiculous.
Okay. Well, next on the agenda, I received a phone call from Jeanette. I don't know how to say your last name.
Monyok.
Manya, and she would like to address the council. Mike, do you want to have any, I assume you had some discussion with her?
Yes, I had a conversation with Ms. Monyok, and she indicated some of the challenges and concerns that she had personally encountered as it related to identifying possible changes in her rental arrangement with her landlord, and then what repercussions or conditions happen to come about from that process. And although she has met with our staff to apprise us of that, we indicated that we don't have an ordinance in place that allows us to step in and to undertake some of the things. And so wanted to make sure that she had a chance. If you remember when we first introduced the ordinance, I think there were about a dozen landlords that showed up at the meeting. There weren't really any tenants. She indicated what her concerns and challenges were, and I said, you're welcome to come in and appear before the council. So I think she wants to come up and just provide for you her personal story, so to speak, as to what she has encountered, and figured it was better to let her do it than for us to try to recap it and recount it for you. So this is Mrs. Monyok from 100 2nd Street Southeast here in New Prague.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, for having me tonight. I've had major issues. I have been a renter at 100 2nd Street for 8 years. My new landlord, Randy, has been the landlord there for 5 years. My old landlord, we have to go back, he didn't up the rent for 15 years. So when Randy bought the property, he upped all our rent by like $10 each resident. There's 12 units. I live in the 4-plex unit. Across the parking lot, there's 8 units. My old landlord covered up a lot of issues instead of fixing them. So these things have been going on for quite a long time. I do have a file here with the chamber downstairs with Chad Lunder. I had spoken to him first, and then he gave me your phone number. I'm just going to touch points here on major issues. We have major black mold issues, water leak that's been going on in the laundry room for over 9 years. It's coming from, I believe, the bathtub upstairs above me in apartment 3, and it's leaking into the laundry room. There's sheetrock to cover up the leak instead of being fixed, so it has leaked down the ceiling and down the wall, and there is very bad mold and everything is just rotted away. I do have pictures of all the things that I've complained about, and that is also in my file. Also, This last spring, an ice dam was not broken off the pipe outside near the parking lot that comes down the building. So instead, it poured through my electrical outlet and all over my carpeting, and my landlord came out and just broke the ice dam, came in with a shop vac and vacuumed the carpet, and told me not to use the electrical outlet, never hired an electrician or anyone to fix it or check it. I did mail him this letter that I have in my file here. I mailed it to him on January 20th, July 20th. No, sorry. June 20th. And then on June 26th of this year, he said, I'm not going to renew my lease with you. You need to vacate the property by July 31st, 2019. He gave me a 6-week notice. I came down and talked to Chad, and I said, well, he's going to not renew my lease. So I was given an attorney's phone number to talk to, and because I'm on a month-to-month lease, he legally doesn't have to have a reason for me to leave. I have a husband and 2 children. Where are we gonna go to live? There's no apartments available in New Prague. I've looked everywhere for homes to live in. So we're out of options right now. I did get a 2-month extension from my landlord to stay there, but he did not put it in writing. So that makes me a bit nervous. The wall in my children's bedroom has rotten sheetrock from an outside spigot that the piping wasn't fixed, so you can smell the mildew in my children's room. I've showed these things to my landlord before. There's handles broken off the windows. So if we have to get out, we have to take the screens off the window and push the window out. We are on the bottom floor, but it's still a major fire hazard. The fire extinguishers have not been serviced since 2014 in both buildings. And also, my landlord does all the plumbing himself. He does not live on site, and it does not have a license. He just tries to do it and figure it out himself. He did replace the toilet in my bathroom a while back, but he didn't put a new O-ring on it. And then something happened with the main line, and the upstairs apartment from me was vacant. I had him come out because all the laundry room wash sink water backed up into my bathtub, and then it backed up from underneath my toilet on the floor. And I had him come out. I said, can you please come out? We need to fix this right away. And he said, no, I'm out of town. I won't be back till Monday. It was a Thursday. And I said, well, then legally you need to put me and my son and my daughter at the time. I said, you need to put us in a hotel until it gets fixed because we do need a working restroom. And then he called me back and said, I'm really not out of town. I'll come and look at it. So he tried snaking all the drains he could, and nothing was happening. He couldn't fix it. When you flush the toilet from upstairs, because he thought he could give me that bathroom to use, it just backed up from under my toilet all over the floor. And then he said, oh, your son must have put toys down the toilet. And I said, no, there's something wrong in the line. So I called my brother, that's a plumber, and had to talk to my landlord, and my brother said, I don't do main lines. You need to hire an outfit that will come out and do it. You cannot work on the line. So he did. The outfit came out the next day, so I was in my kitchen with a bucket for overnight. The person that came out was DC Annis, and they put a camera down. They took the toilet up. He did not put a new O-ring under there, so they had replaced that. And then they found tree roots in the line. And I told him to write it very big in Sharpie pens that there was no toys on the line. So the reason why my landlord is telling me that he's not going to renew my month-to-month lease, I did call and ask him for a reason, and had a resident neighbor listen in on the conversation. And he said, well, your rent is way too low. I need to come in and renovate, but then you can come back in a couple months if you want, but I'm going to up your rent to $825 a month. Right now I'm paying $625, which is very, very reasonable. But his renovations are redoing a floor, like taking the carpet out of the living room. He leaves the 10-plus-year-old carpet in the bedrooms, and then maybe does some bathroom, tile to the bathtub, and that's it. That's his idea of renovating. So these major issues that are going on, I don't believe will be ever fixed. And when I came down to council to, hopefully, or down to Chamber of Commerce to talk to Chad, the inspector, he said, well, we don't have a law in place that says I can just come in. There's no way I can protect your rights as a renter. So, and then I thought of putting my rent into escrow, and the attorney I talked to said that wouldn't be a great idea because I'm on a month-to-month, and all my landlord would have to tell the judge is because, well, I'll fix it and I'll clean everything up as long as, she doesn't live there. So I didn't think that that would be a good route, so I thought I would give you a quick summary of my story here to let you hear.
Can I ask who your landlord is?
Yes, his name is Randy Hennon. Rando is his legal.
So will this go in the file that we're developing now?
Yes, I have it in
No,
file.
we're working on the council's working on a file that we started in what, March? Was it March?
Yes.
We're trying to log anyone that comes forward like you to let us know that there are some issues. Ken, do you know if Mr. Hennon owns other rental property in the city?
I don't know if he owns anything other than that property. I'd have to look at our rental registration list, so I could verify that, but I know one issue that we can address is the plumbing, and that is one thing that Chad has noted. Yeah, he's not allowed to do plumbing himself, and that's one action item we could take. Beyond that, we don't have some of the other codes that would address some of the other issues she has. But the life safety, to a degree we can. I had to actually, when Chad first brought this to my attention, I had actually talked to David Anderson in Scott's office about, what we can do. And if a tenant requests us to go in a unit, we can do that, but that's really where our obligations end. We're not required to issue citations or pursue violations further because we don't have that code. So that's very limited in what we're able to do at this point. But plumbing is one of them that we are going to pursue.
Do most cities
Landlord.
have that in their code?
What's that?
Are we behind? Do most cities have?
No, it's not having the rental inspection ordinance.
Oh, I see,
Yeah.
okay, right.
Jeanette, I don't know if this is a suggestion or not, but have you contacted the health department to have them come and look at the mold and mildew issues?
I have given them a call. I gave HUD Housing a call, actually, and I did complain, and they said that they do not come in for specific black mold and mildew because that happens in a lot of different rental properties, and they just don't have the time or the resources to come.
That's too bad.
Jeanette, I appreciate you coming in. I think we all appreciate you coming in and telling us your circumstances. One of the things we were trying to understand with adopting an inspection is what are the alternatives tenants currently have? You mentioned you talked to an attorney. Have you had guidance from an attorney?
Yes, I have, and they just told me that my best bet is to move out and file for rent abatement because these things have been going on for a long time. Some things have been fixed, but these issues that I have written have not been addressed or fixed that I have in writing here.
What I was trying to understand is this, the state statute has specific provisions that gives tenants rights to deal with these types of things. But did your attorney didn't advise you to follow that or anything like that? Scott, are you familiar with them talking about
I am familiar with that, and that would be my question as well, for what advice you received relative to the Tenant Remedies Act, because there are certain rights you do have as a tenant, and certainly the attorney should point that out to you. Where a lot of times cities meld, the tenant remedies aspect is along with rental registration. We've talked about that before. With the inspection program, it's not the piece that we have. And Sean, to your point, are we behind? I don't think you're behind. Some cities have it, some don't. It's something to consider as a policy to decide when you hear complaints like this. Obviously, it takes time to get in place, but the reality is, no, I agree with you 100%. If there's something talk to the attorney again, ask about the tenant remedies rights or act, because that's where we typically, when we get these questions and other cities get them, try to get people into that as fast as possible.
And I'm not sure if I'm right, but you don't need an attorney
Nope,
to
you don't.
file. Is it with the county?
Yeah, it depends on the county, because they treat them differently. I'm no expert in it, because it typically is not what cities do. We typically say, you know, if you have a private attorney or if you have legal aid or whatever it may be, there are certain housing organizations that also help with that and point people in that direction and can provide assistance as well.
Tenants,
So-
you.
And I'm not saying it's a good remedy, I'm just curious if you
Yeah.
went through that process, because we're trying to understand it and understand what a good ordinance might look like.
Because that's with
The-
sewer county, right?
Sorry.
The sewer company.
Yeah.
The attorney just advised me that I probably wouldn't win the case or go, you know, I'd be spending more, you know, in attorney fees and things like that because I'm on a month-to-month lease. With the month-to-month lease, a landlord, just because they don't like you, can say, oh, you're out next month, and they can give you that 30-day notice, and that's it.
I'm not sure if that's accurate. It doesn't seem accurate to me, but I'm not a lawyer, but I think that statute gives you a little more
It does.
rights.
That's why I'm surprised, because I think the statute gives you, and again, I'm no expert in that because I don't practice in that area, but when we've recommended individuals with complaints like that, I think there's more rights there than getting booted out on a month-to-month.
Well, that's what those landlords came here and said, they have so many options in vehicles to
Yeah,
register complaints
yeah.
that they didn't see why the city of New Prague should have even entertained this
Right.
inspection part of it. So, you know, I agree with Scott. I think there has to be
Yeah.
vehicles and I would probably start with calling the Sewer County Department of Health. Because it is in the Sewer County.
That was an issue, you have to talk to like the state tenants union. That's a retaliatory act too. Month to month, she's on a month to month, so I don't know.
Well, but
So maybe Jeanette is another next step, you know, if you just Google what is it, the tenants, what's the name of the act, or roughly the name of the act, the Minnesota
Renters union
tenants.
or something.
I thought we had a brochure.
Yeah.
I believe you've been given the handbook from Chad.
Yes,
Okay.
the tenants and landlords' rights
Yes.
and responsibilities book, and it has the Attorney General's name on it.
Okay, yeah, it might be something worth pursuing, and I don't believe that you have to have an attorney engaged to be able to do that. I believe it's set up so that the tenant themselves can fill out the necessary, I guess, I'm sure there's some sort of registration or form or something to start the process.
Especially if he's gonna give you a couple of months, but, nasty, I wouldn't want my kids around me home. Clearly a
Thank
retaliatory
you for
act, if you
coming.
ask me, I mean, so I don't.
Yeah, I've been to the hospital many times too, because underneath my sink, I have a toilet paper holder that's metal. But since there's a slight leak under the sink and green algae growing, the whole bottom of the cabinet feels moist all the time. It's squishy of the wooden cabinet, so I'm pretty sure it's rotten. There was green algae growing on the side of my toilet paper holder. Well, I just fill it, so I don't really see it. It's dark, you know. But then I picked it up one day to clean it, and it was completely rusted on the bottom and algae growing on the side. Well, I had been in the hospital many a times for bladder infection. So I'm guessing that's where it came from. I stopped using that, and I just keep everything in the linen closet where it's clean and dry, and I haven't had an issue, so I haven't changed my lifestyle.
Bet it smells real good in there too, huh?
Yeah, it doesn't, you can, right when you walk in the building, you can smell the mold. You can smell. It's really, and even sitting right outside the building on this front stoop, you can smell the mold.
Well, it's an unfortunate situation, and I'm sorry that had to happen to you and possibly the other tenants. I hope you can get some relief, and it's good for us to hear these types of situations so that we can make a determination on how to move forward.
Sure, thank you so much for your time.
thank you.
Thanks for coming. Good luck.
Are we set to review that again in what, September, I mean?
October.
First of 6 months. Okay.
And that list is getting very colorful, I assume.
Got a few on the list.
We do.
Thank you again, Jeanette.
Yes, you're welcome, thank you.
Okay, next on the agenda, consent agenda. Does anyone have any questions or concerns on the consent agenda?
No, this might be a good spot. I mean, the transportation packet I received is in there. The transportation, Scott County Transportation, yes.
If I can interrupt, that would be an item under the miscellaneous to cover.
Yeah, just whatever is in the consent agenda.
Okay, I thought that was in the consent. Pardon me.
We can talk about it.
So I only had one question, and maybe it was just a number put on a different line, but the City of New Prague Cash and Investment Summary, General Fund, Enterprise, and Other Funds. So it's this document.
In the back.
Very first page, front. Yep. So I was just curious, is it? Yeah, it is. So I was just curious. I was just curious, Mike, what the line item 429,210, is that an investment in one of the banks or savings? I was just, it didn't really tie into any particular account.
I'll have to check with our finance director and see what has erroneously appeared as not aligned with something.
Okay, yeah,
So I'll
I
have
was
to
just,
get you the answer from that one.
nothing critical, but I thought, yeah, we've got $400,000 there for this.
Is this, are you talking about the one that refers to the U.S. Bank?
No,
It's kind of sitting alone, it doesn't tie to anything.
Does your bank account have that number anywhere?
that's the only item. It's-
Now I've got to have the attorney.
Okay, if there's no other questions,
Is that your number 2?
I guess I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda. We got a second by Bruce Wolf. So if there's nothing else, no questions, all in favor of the consent agenda, say aye. Aye. Any opposition? Okay, that's 5-0. Miscellaneous, now what? Mitch, how you been?
Fantastic.
All right, thanks. Nothing?
Nothing.
Patrick?
I'm good.
Okay. Chris, anything else? All right. James?
Just one item. Today I was approached by the brewery. They will be putting in a request for their Octoberfest celebration, which will be on the next council packet, for October 5th.
Oh my God.
I'll call them and let them know what happened to tonight's meeting. But that's when he did it last year, was the first weekend in October.
Not to confuse it, 'cause that's under a different subdivision of the statute.
It is. He's allowed to do that
That's different
by
than
statute.
what
Yeah,
With conditions.
with conditions, yeah.
Well, the statute doesn't require
Uh,
for brewery.
Well, they've got specific requirements they have to meet, if that's what you mean by conditions, but. Well,
The statute.
But some of the same things that we put in place for others, fenced in area, controlled access, some of those same things. That's all I have.
Okay, Glenn?
Just to update on the construction project. If you read in the update, the construction update that you got on Friday, they talked about opening the north roundabout on Thursday and closing down the intersection of 37 and Columbus on Friday. That has been moved to Monday of next week now. But the weather's cooperative. They're moving ahead. They're moving in the right direction here. So things are looking better out there today. At the end of the day, before or towards the end of the day, they had looked like all the concrete done at the north roundabout or at Columbus and 12th. They got quite a bit of the concrete done on County Road 37, finishing that up. They were tarring, and I'm sure should have finished all the rest of the residential streets. Well, not only residential, but First Street by the bank there off 10th Avenue going towards Casey, or towards Ace Hardware. Lady Slipper, Cottonwood, a number of those roads that they had to finish up yet that we were considering to be the residential roads. So I'm sure they finished those today. So like I said, with the help of nice weather, they are moving in the right direction. So we're getting closer.
When are they gonna be able to get rid of those cones on 7th and, you know, I think they're all on the,
On the manholes.
Yeah.
They're marking them, when they put on the second lift, which is supposed to happen like the August 22nd or something like that, was the plan for the last lift on County Road 37.
Okay.
Yeah, they're leaving them on there so nobody would hit them real hard. And I know the traffic blows them over, knocks them over, and it's a constant headache, but.
I do have a question for you too. They painted the center line down, you know, from where you're talking about, from all the way down. They can't be done with that tar because, I mean, there's a lip.
That's temporary, just temporary marking. Temporary marking. Yep. Yep. No, so you're right, they're not done. That's all I got.
Then, you know what they did is they cut off my pathway, so I can't get to go and look at it all now.
No.
Conspiracy,
I think it was intentional.
Yeah. Ken, do you have anything?
I do. I just want to address, I believe the council got an email from a resident near Mr. Wynant's property on the corner of 7th Street Northeast and Lexington Avenue North about some nuisance violations. I have been in pretty much constant contact with Mr. Wynant since this particular resident had made a complaint back in July. I did send Mr. Wynant a new violation letter today, and basically I had to put the brakes on the other violation because we had the road construction going on. He had a new curb cut poured to 7th Street Northeast. We didn't necessarily want his big equipment in there to potentially damage things. So the letter that went out today gives him until the 15th of August to clean up hay bales, get rid of the trees that look like they're uprooted out of the ground and sitting on that lot, get rid of the brush piles, and reseed the disturbed areas that he's kind of torn up again this spring and summer. So
Is that in the wetland there?
he's maintained his wetland buffer, so that hasn't been any problem. He's had his silt fence up there, so no concern with the wetland or anything, but the remainder of it, so I basically had 4 violations that were noted on there, so there's until the 15th. If he doesn't correct them, he will be cited. And we'll kind of see where that goes, but yeah, we didn't want him going in there when we had all the construction going on, but concrete cured, I believe that was, he could go back on there as of yesterday.
Yep. He's
So
good to
that was kind of the limiting factor on that, so no restriction on that. And so I just wanted to let the council know, I believe everybody got an email from the resident on the station, so address that today with them. So that's all I had.
What about the trees or the hay bale stuff?
Oh, I addressed that already.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yep.
I know it's been a long meeting.
Yeah. Mike, do you have anything else? Maggie? Oh, hold it.
all right.
Barb, you're in that little.
I'm hiding. No, I don't.
Oh, okay.
I only have one question. I know a little while ago, we had all gotten an email from Brett Wagner asking when the athletic facility assessment may begin. I just want to make sure that someone was able to get back to him. I didn't see a reply, so.
I have that on my list.
Okay.
But he keeps stating 2018. I don't think he saw the 2019 list of priorities. That went down a rung.
Yeah.
You know, so, Mike, if you
I got that document while I was going on vacation.
but if you do respond to him, send him the latest list so that he doesn't keep sending the 2018 and 2017 and 2016.
I can tell you, if I didn't have to spend so much time dealing with the individual requests for premises extension, I could do some of those kind of things. But no, I will respond to Mr. Wagner.
No, I just want to just make sure at least someone says, yeah, we're working on it or whatever.
Yeah, or just say, your priority is not number 2 anymore, it's down to 4. And anything else? Maggie?
Oh, no.
John?
Yeah, I just have a couple. Did we, my first one is probably to you, Ken. When was the last time that we did Columbus there? I don't know if you answered, Jim. Columbus, that we're on the, next to the golf course going down with that road construction. I'm sorry, I didn't believe it.
Like a speed count?
No, not a speed count. The last time we did road construction on Columbus down there.
Oh.
Do you know the exact date, or could you get that date for me? I just had a resident down that street wanted to know.
Must have that under.
You mean for the overlays we just did?
Not the overlays, the infrastructure.
Well, that's original.
You
We should be able to pinpoint the date on that.
Yeah.
Okay, so it was
that
just a
was-
mill and overlay was the last time there was construction on that?
No.
No,
No.
that was-
Further down you're talking.
Are you talking north or south?
I'm talking
Main Street.
south.
Yeah, I used to live on Columbus.
Okay.
That was total. Because we had it was all flooded. so
Okay.
they did
Do you remember the year of that, or?
For 20 years since.
Okay.
It was like 96 that there was some storm work done,
Yeah.
and then a mill and overlay.
Yeah.
But there was
They put
no
all-
utilities
I think
replaced.
they put fabric all along that meadow area.
So 96, are we thinking, or?
I could verify that.
I'll see if it would, if he was wanted, it was for Jim Brock, wanted to know the last time that was done. I thought maybe he caught it at the golf course or something, but, okay. All right, I'll let him know that if he has any more questions, I'll direct him to you, is that okay?
Sure.
Okay.
Yep.
And then second of all, I had another resident that, and Jim, this is for you, are our parking tickets in the park $138? And if so, who sets that?
It is set by
Council ordinance, or?
council ordinance and what that offense is. But most parking.
Overnight parking, it was overnight, the baseball thing was going on, there was a wedding, so people were parking into the park, and
Okay.
then this gentleman decided to walk home or take a ride home, and left his car overnight, didn't want to move it, and found this parking ticket on, and it was $138, I
It
think.
could be, I'll check on it tomorrow, but
That seemed really high to me, I don't, if that's.
it might be because it's written under the ordinance violation. though.
Okay, maybe the council could take, I don't know what your guys' feeling is, I think that's maybe a little excessive.
Excessive, but especially since the guy was, trying
Being
not to
smart,
drink and
trying to do the
drive.
right thing, but the other deal is why is the golf course parking lot different from the Memorial Park parking lot? Because that, you can park your car overnight. Is that not correct? Without a ticket?
It is well,
It's a street.
it's a street
Right, but it has.
going through there.
Right, but it has parking stalls and you allow park, just as
Yep.
that other section does. And he was right around the corner, on that backside by the cabin. There's a row of parking right there.
Are we talking about Nate?
No. Was it? Maybe it was. I got it from his dad, but he said this was like.
He said he was parked up by a shelter,
Yeah,
right next to a shelter. I didn't know that it was the south shelter, but yeah, he said he was parked by a shelter and left it there.
will it say on the, 'cause he
Yeah.
texted me a picture of the ticket. I don't know if it'll tell the exact.
Well, can
But I
take
was
a
just
look.
surprised that it was 100 and,
No, if it was 138, it was because it was part of an ordinance violation,
okay,
beyond the parking anyways.
okay. That just seemed a little excessive to me for an overnight parking, especially given that area where, again, there was this event, a baseball tournament, and then a wedding, so all the parking was filled. So, it almost forced people to go around into that park.
Hmm.
I don't know,
The one that was written by the new man. I think, when the officer runs into that situation, they try to get it up on the computer, so it should be pretty consistent, so I don't know. But I feel bad for the guy. I mean, he's trying to be a smart person.
Well, if there's a council adopted ordinance that was violated, then a ticket could have been issued.
No, I'm not, you're right.
The dollar amount, without knowing and without having Jim check, is how much of that is applicable to the ordinance, or whether there's any court costs or anything else that are tacked on to that. That's what we'll need to find out.
Right, and I appreciate getting that information. If that's the case, so I'd like maybe the council, maybe we could bring that up to look at that ordinance. Because there obviously is, I know there's signs that says there's no overnight parking, and the park closes technically at 10. But
11.
it can be confusing to people, especially out of town people, in that area where I think they were, which you can determine too. But the fact that cars can stay overnight in the golf course, it just seems like a continuous parking lot area. And I don't know, maybe even the council can allow parking in that back part of the,
Up and around it,
just
yeah.
to extend it.
You could designate where.
I'd just like to take a look at it, because it did seem really excessive for me with court costs and everything else, or we'll wait till we get that back.
Sure, I'll check on it.
And then the other question was, the email we got from Dan Seymour, did you find any information out on that? I mean, or is there he made a very good point that given the parking area that he had, he couldn't really park there with either a fire hydrant on one side or his neighbor's driveway on the other.
I think he parked, what?
He parks perpendicular to the curb.
Yeah, he went straight
He's
in.
still making that same point, as unlawful as it is, and he hasn't gotten another ticket yet, but no, if he, well, the vehicle is not parked lawfully, and I talked to Glenn about it. I said, hey, you okay with vehicles parking like this? He said, well, I don't know. I said, well, it's not parked according to state statute, parallel with the curb, 12 inches off the curb, and that's the idea. And his statement was, hey, I don't have enough space between my driveway and my neighbor's driveway. If I park along there, then my neighbor backs into my car. For him to be lawfully parked there, that would sound like an issue between him and his neighbor, not, oh, I'm gonna just park unlawful then.
Sure. I guess the point that I thought he was trying to make, and actually I did talk to him, he called me on the phone, but is there a way, I mean, in that situation, would the officer have the ability to just put a note on the car and say this is just unlawful, or a warning ticket or something, instead of issuing a ticket? If it continues, if it is indeed unlawful, which it sounds like, and he doesn't listen, then obviously tickets should be issued, but it just seems like the first time, given the circumstances, I don't.
And I talked to the officer, he saw it several times, and just that it was parked there.
Right.
And then the night that he did enforcement, he wrote 2 tickets that night.
Okay.
But that's what he said to me, that, hey, it was obviously going on longer than once. And then I just heard last week that it's still being parked that way.
It's still.
But yeah, I'll make contact with him and talk to him.
Oh, okay, just so he doesn't get an iron or
Yeah.
whatever. I mean, I totally get if it's winter time too, and the plow has to come
Yeah.
through, and, you know, so. Okay, that was it, that's the last question I had.
Okay.
Bruce, do you have anything?
Okay, Rick, I got a couple things. This Unified Transit Management Committee that I'm on, they finally had organized and had their first meeting, and it was in Prior Lake Library. And it's kind of coincidental, but my transportation, they would take me there, but they wouldn't come get me because it was after 7. So it was like, so I had to have somebody grab a manual chair and bring me in a manual chair and go up to the meeting that way. They're considering doing roving meetings. Just about all the cities were represented. And we get less transportation pretty much than anybody. You know what I mean? So I got a lot of work to do on that committee, but they're going to hold their next meeting here in New Prague. Mike suggested it be at the fire department.
We've already got arrangements just to do it here.
Okay,
Been
cool.
contacted and set up. so-
That's what I was wondering, because I got an email today saying it would be here. Okay, that's good on that. If there's ever any questions, then just let me know. All we did is went over the history of the old one and then started a new one, you know what I mean? So it was a long meeting, but good. They had sandwiches and stuff, so. What did you say?
Well, I think you'll do very well.
And then on the skating rink, they had asked me if I would check into with Bruce on electrical. And Bruce told me that he had already redone all of that into LED lighting. And what they were considering is trying to get LED lighting in there because, it was a $40,000 bill last year. And Bruce told me that that's already LED lighting, so I don't know.
What area?
Community center.
Yeah.
Oh, the
right.
community center, I was thinking the skating rink, I'm thinking.
No,
the
the ice
skate
rink.
park, there's another.
No, yeah, the hockey rink, the ice skating rink.
Okay, community center, okay.
So they've got a lot of ideas and crazy stuff going on, but there was nothing I could do for them. So let's see here, then the third item I had was, I was gonna check with you on that meeting, so I think that's it.
Okay,
Yeah.
I don't have anything, so Scott, we should adjourn this meeting? Anything?
Yes, and then we'll open the,
Okay. Okay, I make a motion to adjourn. Second by Rick Seiler. All in favor of adjournment, say aye. Aye. All right, passes 5-0.
Coming from a check.